full undergraduate course.
Known globally and internationally, full running PhD program by then.
Magkaroon na rin kami ng sariling building.
These things may not be here yet, but one thing is for sure. Dreams are big in the National Teacher Training Center for the Health Professions. As the second youngest college in the University of the Philippines, Manila, NTTCHP is geared towards expansion and growth, creating huge waves of innovation in the field of health science education in the coming years.
NTTCHP is one of 9 degree granting units of the University of the Philippines, Manila. As a graduate college, we equip health professionals to be effective facilitators of learning, educational planners, evaluators, researchers, managers, and leaders through our various programs. We analyze evidence, we generate knowledge, and from there advocate best practice in all educational settings for the advancement of health professions education.
As of the end of the first semester of 2019 to 2020, the college has produced 95 BCH PED, 101 DH PED, and 189 MH PED graduates who have been appointed to key and strategic positions to contribute to transformative education of health professionals. NTTCHP not only creates impact in Manila, but also in different parts of the world through their international partners, namely Thai Binh Medical University, Hanoi, Vietnam, the University of Health Sciences, Lao People's Democratic Republic, and the University of Health Sciences, Kingdom of Cambodia. From among the mentioned alumni, 16 are DH PED and 12 are MH PED alumni from the Kingdom of Cambodia through a collaboration program with the World Health Organization Western Pacific Regional Office and the French Cooperation.
When teaching and learning in the health sciences first came out in 2010, everybody was quite excited because it was the first textbook from the Philippines in health professions education. It won the most outstanding book awarded by the National Academy of Science and Technology in 2011 by Dr. Badnaranay. It was a thought-provoking book that made the concepts of teaching and learning simple.
The National Teacher Training Center for the Health Sciences was founded in January 30, 1975. During the University of the Philippines Board of Regents' 857th meeting, the center, headed by its founding director, Dr. Corazon P. Gonzalez, was under the Dean of the UP College of Medicine, Dr. Florentino B. Herrera Jr. In its 899th meeting, held on March 13, 1978, the UP Board of Regents changed the name of NTTC to the National Teacher Training Center for the Health Professions, or NTTCHP. UP Manila was then declared by the UP Board of Regents as an autonomous unit in the Health Science Campus in 1979.
NTTCHP was founded during the Decada 70 or the first 10 years of martial law. Despite of all the challenges of the 70s, we were able to develop more or less a robust training program for faculty development that eventually resulted to strengthening of the way we teach health professions education.
NTTCHP was originally a part of the master plan of the World Health Organization or WHO's network of teacher training centers. In 1971, Dr. Corazon P. Gonzalez, then a full-time faculty member of the UP College of Medicine Department of Physiology, was sent to train to the Regional Teacher Training Center in Sydney, Australia. After her training, the WHO was convinced that there's a future of an NTTC based in the University of the Philippines, Manila. WHO noted the strong and positive response of UP Manila to health professions education. May 28, 1981, the UP Board of Regents approved the offering of the MHPA degree program. With this degree program, the NTTC ceased to become a mere service unit and became a degree-granting college of UP Manila.
So in the school year of 2001-2002, the master's degree program in health professions education was developed into a ladderized curriculum. Ladderizing the program allows the students to exit at any point, ending up with a certificate, a diploma, or a master's degree.
Responding to the challenges of the 21st century, and in synchrony with the policy standards, the mandate of the University of the Philippines and the Guidelines for Graduate Education Program of the Commission on Higher Education, the college now offers the Master in Health Professions Education or MHPED professional track, consisting of 30 units of coursework, and the Master of Arts in Health Professions Education or MAPED, which is the academic track composed of 24 units of coursework plus 6-unit theses, totaling 30 units. The two master's degree programs include new core and elective courses and reconfigured courses from the ladderized program and capstone project or portfolio. Furthermore, the new DRH-PED professional track program is open to all master's degree holders interested to pursue a career track in advanced HPED fields. It is composed of 26 units of coursework and 12 units of dissertation. Finishers of this program are expected to 1. Pursue careers as health professions education scientists who conduct independent research and contribute new knowledge, methodologies, and technologies. 2. Educational leaders and managers who can address the challenges of the 21st century higher education institutions. And 3. Agents of transformative learning.
NTTC HP's curriculum is offered in both residential and off-campus platforms. It was first offered off-campus mode in Cebu Institute of Medicine from 2004 to 2008, then in the Kingdom of Cambodia from 2012 to 2015. At that time, NTTC HP was recognized as one of 2 of WHO's Regional Education Development Center in the Health Professions Education in the Western Pacific region. In 2015, NTTC HP's curriculum was again offered as off-campus mode in Cebu Institute of Medicine and Southwestern University, FINMA.
The National Teacher Training Center for the Health Professions is proud to have 7 heads of units from its foundation. They are the ones who greatly shaped the college over the years and give it its deserving prestige and platform. From 1 full-time and 2 part-time faculty members, NTTC-HP now has an impressive lineup of professors. The research extension and professional staff of NTTC-HP is also composed of 2 researchers and 2 library personnel. And there are 6 administrative staff. After 45 years, and true to the original World Health Organization mandate, NTTC-HP, through its alumni from different institutions, paved the way for the creation of 8 medical education units, namely UP College of Medicine, the University of Santo Tomas Faculty of Medicine and Surgery, the University of the East Ramon Magsaysay Memorial Medical Center, and Manila Central University in the National Capital Region, De La Salle Medical and Health Sciences Institutes in Luzon, Cebu Institute of Medicine, and the West Visayas State University College of Medicine in the Visayas and Davao Medical School Foundation, College of Medicine in Mindanao. In 2012, the Educational Development Centers for the Health Professions were also founded in the University of Health Sciences, Kingdom of Cambodia, and Lao People's Democratic Republic. The 21st century brings new and emerging roles for the present health professions educators. NTTC-HP responds by offering its revised outcome-based and blended learning postgraduate curriculum in 2020. The college will continue to offer relevant programs, conduct research and extension services that meet the challenges and gaps of the time in the Philippines and in the Western Pacific region. With all these trusts and accomplishments, NTTC-HP hopes to be recognized as a national center for excellence for teacher education and the World Health Organization's collaborating center in health professions education.
A pleasant afternoon, everyone. Welcome to NTTC-HP's 47th anniversary celebration. We will be starting and a few minutes. While waiting, we would like to remind all participants of some house rules. First, kindly mute your mic and or turn off your videos all throughout the presentation. Second, you can type your questions in the chat box. Third, please do not record or take pictures of the slides without the permission of the resource person. Fourth, the Q&A will follow after the presentation. Fifth, do not forget to accomplish or fill out the client satisfaction survey for you to receive your e-certificate. Finally, we have applied for PRC Continuing Professional Development Units for dentistry, licensed professional teacher, medicine, nursing, occupational therapy, pharmacy, and physical therapy. Towards the end of the seminar, Ricky, our administrative officer, will discuss the details on how to obtain the credit for this seminar. I'm Mayet Buela, the college librarian of NTTC-HP. Our administrative officer, Frederick Dantes, and I will be your MCs today. We would like to thank you for attending our first monthly seminar for this year. We have 178 participants on Zoom, and some are joining us through the YouTube live stream. Our theme for this year's series of monthly seminars is Authentic Assessment. What is it? How is it different from the assessments that we are familiar with? To give us an overview of Authentic Assessment is a full-time professor of the National Teacher Training Center for the Health Professions, University of the Philippines, Manila. Professor Nemuel Cervantes Pahutagan is the immediate past dean of NTTC-HP and the current coordinator of our Learning Resources Unit. Professor Pahutagana obtained his medical degree from the Far Eastern University Nicanor Reyes Memorial Foundation and his Master in Health Professions Education from the University of Maastricht, the Netherlands. Dr. Pahutagana is the founding director of the Interactive Learning Center of UP Manila until his deanship in NTTC-HP. He is also the founding president of the Corazon P. Gonzalez Memorial Foundation that supports our monthly seminars. Let us all welcome Professor Nemuel S. Pahutagana.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this first salvo of our yearly monthly seminar. As introduced, I'm Dr. Pahutagana. Is my audio coming in okay, Ricky?
Sir, yes, sir. Okay po.
Okay. So again, welcome to this particular presentation. During the last 2 years, our clinical activity, especially those who are teaching in the health professions, or our clinical teaching activity have been reduced to almost like face-to-face, no patient encounter, and of course, assessments were limited basically to online assessment. With some areas, we have several software that we use to ensure that students are observed properly, like proctoring, or even using open source like Safe Exam Browser. And it became a major issue to a lot of people, especially those involved in, let's say, as I said, doing clinical teaching, or those who are involved, for example, in giving training and certification of postgraduate interns, in even residents and fellow. Even at one point, shared by one faculty member in UP, for example, that they are not yet able to graduate, for example, in College of Dentistry students, because precisely of the absence of human interaction, real patients, and therefore they are not able to assess if students are ready. No, because there's no evidence that students are ready, as there are no or not enough assessment. Students are multifaceted and capable of performing and producing different aspects of oneself depending on the situation or encounter. They tell us then that we need to worry about the difference between students performing for credit and just being himself or herself, or the authentic version of themselves. This is very important as we start the whole discussion, because we talk about students, for example, performing to show. We always talk about students performing to pass, but not necessarily performing to be able to perform there in the future. Kaya minsan sabi natin, nag-review ka for the exam tomorrow, tonight, because you know that if you review it tonight, you will be able to probably get more scores and get a good grade. And at that particular point, because of the role of credits, the role of scores, the role of ratings, you are basically performing to show off, but not necessarily performing the real you. Parang ano yan eh, parang if you are, for example, trying to get the attention of someone, and of course that's always the theme in the love story, that you always have to introduce yourself to somebody and you want to show the best in you, but that the best in you may not necessarily the true you. And if that's true in everyday, situation, in everyday context, then that's also possible in our current assessment protocol. Are we really measuring the students? Are we really getting the correct assessment of the competencies of our students? When the faculty and staff were meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, and we're discussing this particular presentation, I was thinking of a nice cliche or a nice Filipino word that we use every day when we are faced with several, people we are not sure of. Sabi natin, magpakatotoo ka, o kaya sa totoo lang, di ba? Sa totoo lang. And that's exactly what authentic assessment is all about. Sa totoo lang. Is that student really, or can the student really perform if that particular student will be, for example, now deployed in a real situation, in a context where that particular student will have to now face real patient, real family members, for example, parents of children who are accompanying their kids for examinations, or if you're a doctor to the barrios, the reality of facing local government officials and politicians, which basically are sometimes will sometimes bring you in conflict with their agenda and your public health agenda, and it would be very difficult for you to deal with them because you never were able to experience how to deal with them in your real life, in your learning situation in the college. So this makes authentic assessment a very relevant topic for our health professions education. But you have to realize that authentic assessment is not something new. Hindi naman ito bago eh. If you really even look into thousands of years before us, you already know that even philosophers would want to know if their students, their pupils, are able to perform or able to show or to demonstrate the skill that they learn. For example, talk about Socratic questioning, and that's why Socratic questioning, and that's basically during the time will you be able to really participate in that dialogue? Will you be able to defend a position using logic? Can you demonstrate that? So authentic assessment is not something new. But of course, I'm just thought about this as I was talking now. Our educational system, as we move towards more mass graduation and mass teaching, we also started developing mass assessment. Meaning, when I was a medical student, for example, there were only 10 medical schools. And even before me, PRC can afford an essay examination. Hindi na namin inabutan yung essay, no? Hindi ko alam kung swerte kami or malas kami. Because we're not able to really experience a totally different assessment. Ibig sabihin, konti lang estudyante natin. Konti na nagtitake ng board exam. Probably can afford some certain methodology that can, accommodate more students. But now we have 52 medical schools, 56 medical schools. How many graduates do we have? And if you, for example, would like to really assess at the mass level, then you will have to design some assessment protocols that can be done quickly, sample more, and of course at a cheaper price. But of course, that may come at the expense of being able to really perform authentic assessment. That's why it's very difficult for schools to even, for example, do a more comprehensive or more, a bigger OSCE type of examinations because of the expense, the cost, the practicality, and of course, the availability of human resource that can facilitate that kind of assessment. So, from that a little bit long introduction, let me now give you my objectives for this particular seminar. At the end of this seminar, you will be able to explain what is authentic assessment. Discuss the rationale for using authentic assessment. Siguro alam niyo naman na, pero gusto lang nating i-reiterate. Bakit natin kailangan gamitin yung authentic assessment? Well, we cannot always do authentic assessment, because of, as I said, some of the major logistical requirements. But nevertheless, it's important that we do have authentic assessment as part of our arsenal of assessment. Prepare a blueprint for an authentic assessment? Well, not necessarily a blueprint, but a blueprint related to either you want to define from your outcomes if you are to measure either performance or product. And that I will explain later. Then select the most appropriate authentic assessment approaches. We will not literally discuss approaches, but we will be dealing more with principles and this what you call it, planning guides or planning principles that will help you in preparing or at least thinking about when you are to design or to implement your own authentic assessment. And the last tail end of the presentation, we'll talk about validity issues on the use of authentic assessment. Kasi baka isipin nyo, because it's already authentic assessment, it will be the most valid of all the approaches. But you will be surprised. There will be issues related to the validity of authentic assessment. And as mentioned by Mayet, there will be some CPE units. So we have applied CPD units for this course. So if you want to get the CPD units, please submit your exercise outputs that will be asked of you along the way. Okay, so let's start. So let's start by doing a review of student assessment, because the whole authentic assessment is, of course, the whole authentic assessment is part of the overall assessment program or plan that we need to implement or plan and implement in our own institutions. And you know that our assessment comes in many forms and are conducted according to different phases or different stages of the development of the course, from prior to the establishment of the course or prior to the start of the course to several years after you graduated from the course. Whatever your approach is in assessment, in assessing student achievement, always remember and be guided by this single term: alignment. Alignment. A lot of our students sometimes are complaining, or even when I was a student, I was complaining. I'm sure once in a while you also complain about your assessment or the assessment you went through or you're going through in schools. You say, why are they giving this kind of test? I don't know why. What's the relevance of this test to what I am taking now? So it's important that all of us who are involved in assessment to start thinking in the context of alignment. And what do we mean by alignment here? Alignment of what? Or alignment where? So when you talk about doing your own assessment, or if you are preparing for assessment design or planning, as I said, alignment is something that you have to start dealing with. And when you talk about alignment, then you probably will need to be reminded of some very basic assessment plan components. This is not a comprehensive list of assessment plan components, but just rather to highlight the alignment perspective or the alignment concept that I'm dealing here. So when you are doing your assessment, your assessment and the concomitant interpretation or grading that you will have to use after the exam will have to be congruent every time with your outcomes and your purpose. No way that your examination will be valid if your examination is not related to the outcome. or if it will not cover the outcome as defined in your curriculum design or instructional design. That's why knowing for you to be able to design any type of assessment, be it the regular assessment, traditional paper and pencil test, or the more comprehensive authentic assessment programs, without you knowing or having a deep understanding or deep, appreciation of the outcomes that you intend to achieve in your course. You cannot just say, no, I am just a substitute, and therefore I'm not really familiar with the whole outcomes, and I'm just familiar with the outcome that was, or the intended learning outcome for the topic that was assigned to me. So even, for example, in specialty boards, subspecialty boards, PRC, we always talk about, where are your questions coming from? Are your questions coming from actually listed outcomes for the program? And especially if you're looking into authentic assessment. If you, for example, intend to certify your graduates in the context of ASEAN qualification standards, that outcome, the outcome that you will have to be measured, that you have to measure, and after you have given the exam and recorded the information or collected the data and make an interpretation, you can guarantee ASEAN that the person you certified is indeed ready for the requirement of the profession in the ASEAN region. So that's important. So outcome is the most basic of all assessment preparation. No outcome list, no assessment. That's why even in our class in HP 231, for example, or evaluation, the first thing you ask, is the program evaluable? And what do you mean by evaluable? Will we be able to get a list of at least intended outcome of that program? Because if we don't have a list of intended outcome for the program, how will you know that we have arrived? How will we know that we have achieved something? And of course, it's also important for us to align our assessment methods and interpretation grading to the purpose. So let's to the why of your assessment. So let's just a little bit look at the details of this particular outcome. So when you talk about outcomes, just as I said, it's a review. I would like to bring you back and remember the Bloom's taxonomy, which is a cognitive taxonomy from remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating to creating. Those are what we call cognitive dimensions. And of course, you remember what? You remember what we call the knowledge dimension. You remember concepts. You remember facts. You remember procedures. You even have metacognitive knowledge. So these outcomes, as you will already notice, will actually require different levels of authenticity. If the only thing you want to know is remember, then I think you don't need to get very sophisticated or prepare a very sophisticated assessment protocol or program. So knowing or understanding this basic outcome, what do you call it, dimensions, is crucial in your preparation of assessment plans. As I said, be it the more traditional to the more complicated authentic assessment. And it also would bring us to the other very popular concept of Miller's or domains under the Miller's pyramid or clinical skills dimension. I will show more details of this as we move forward. And also, we need to be reminded of CHED's OBE curriculum map requirements or terminologies, where they use introduce, practice, and demonstrate. And of course, the demonstrate probably there will be really the thing or the competency areas that you need to really measure under the authentic context or authentic assessment context. So these are the outcomes. So as I said, if you will be testing, if you are to align your assessment based on outcomes, then you have to consider all these dimensions. You don't have to overkill your outcome or your assessment if your intended learning outcome for that particular topic is just for them to remember, for just them to understand. Unless, of course, at the end of the course, when all of them will be put together in a certain what do you call it, comprehensive integrative examination. And we also, as I said, need to align our assessment not just from the outcomes, but also for the purpose of the assessment. And that could be influenced. The purpose will be influenced by the timing of the assessment. For example, if you want to give an assessment before instruction, then you're probably doing a readiness assessment. And the readiness will be related only as far as what will be covered in the course. For some who are using, for example, what we call team-based approach, they have what we call IRAT or TRAT, individual readiness test, for example. So that's before instruction, and that will be different purpose. As I said, readiness, but also you're doing it also in relation to your instructional design preparation. That even before you start your course, you may want to do some tweaking to respond to the level of preparedness of your participants. If you know, for example, that your participants are already 100% in relation to intended outcome of the course, and then why do you need to do that again? Maybe you can do another thing. Maybe you can, instead of giving them lectures or providing them concepts, you may want to provide them with a level up activity, probably already performance level activity. And of course, during instruction, we have either it could be session level, subject level, or course level. So what is your purpose? The purpose during instruction is basically more of monitoring the development of your student so that you will be able to provide interventions as you move forward. For example, you know that your students are lagging behind. Majority of them are lagging behind. Then probably you may have to do some makeup classes or slow down. And if your students are already advanced, they're moving faster than you expect, then you probably also need to, increase the speed of your delivery of your intended outcomes or content. And you don't have to just follow the schedule because it's the schedule. You know already in your monitoring during instruction that your students are performing very well and advanced in an advanced level, then you don't have to wait. Respond to that level of preparedness. Respond to that level of performance. And as I said, that's the purpose of you doing an assessment during instruction. And during instruction, assessment is different, or your purpose for during instruction is different from your purpose after instruction. Because during instruction, you probably will deal with lots or lower order thinking skills a lot, more than HATs. When we talk about after instruction, especially after courses, after programs, then the requirement is for you to really go into application or assessment of application of outcomes, higher order thinking skills. And since the purpose is different, you're already looking into the higher level outcomes, then your assessment will also change. At that particular point, you may already probably need some simulated examinations and workplace level assessment. Like when you bring your student, for example, to the ward for clerkship, or you bring your physical therapy students to affiliated rehabilitation centers, or you bring your OT to some accredited networks or network of clinics, or if you bring your nurses to actual rotation in clinical or hospital facilities or OPD facilities, then you're looking into already at an after instruction assessment, and that would be application. And therefore, if that's the scenario, your purpose of assessment is totally different. Therefore, your level of your traditional assessment may not suffice. Because why will you use traditional assessment protocol for a totally different purpose? Nandun ka na nga sa performance eh. But ang papagawa mo pa rin, mag-take sila mag-take ng long exams. And you know that long examination, the context of that particular after instruction event may not be a good source of data, or the result of that long examination may not be a good source of data that will help you make objective and valid inference related to performance of your students. That's why I said levels of authenticity will actually move to both direction, high level to low level, depending on the purpose of your assessment. Before instruction, can actually be, all levels will be there. For example, if you are to train students or participants for computer literacy, then you may want to test them already you don't ask them about what is a computer, what is Word, what are the parts of a computer. You probably would like them to actually use the computer and measure or document their performance. So at the particular situation, even when you're still at before instruction level, you're already using a high fidelity examinations. Okay. Now that we have discussed the general concepts and reviewed some of the major issues related to assessment, may I ask you now to participate in the first interactive session that we have, meaning your time to share now. So, how would you describe an authentic assessment? Can you give example in your own understanding? Before we proceed to defining what authentic assessment is, how would you describe an authentic assessment? You can share via the chat box and we will read them, or you can download the form there in Google Drive that probably shared by Claire already. By the way, in that Google Drive file, you will have a cascading assignment. So by the end of after you completed that assignment, that will be part of the document that will be used to help get the CPD unit for you, as we will submit them to PRC or your individual assignments. Okay, so let's start. Just 5 minutes. Oh, dami na. Let's see. So depende sa sa aking simula yan. Sabi kung sino unahin natin si Joe. You can open your mic and just share. Joe, case study.
During the training of some healthcare professionals, what we do is assign a case where they would be applying what they've learned through the sessions and the reading materials that are provided for them. So there would be an application, they would be doing actual assessment, and eventually identifying problems of that particular patient and providing health education that's applicable to the problems identified.
Okay. So you said you use a case study. And is that case scenario that you mentioned and the exercise that you mentioned, will that be enough for you to say it's authentic?
In a sense, that would just be part of what we're actually doing. That the trainees are given actual opportunity to apply or to practice what they have learned from the teaching learning encounters we have with them. But we also, during the training, there would be also case analysis, given cases that they would be analyzing more or less in preparation for them to be able to do this in their actual patients.
Is this individual activity?
Yes, individual activity.
I'm asking that because we will go back to that as we will discuss later. Some of the major requirements for make it authentic. Now, sabihin natin, yes, there may be cases you may have asked them to solve a real scenario, but will that experience cover the authentic requirement, the requirement of an authentic patient clinical encounter? So we'll park that, say case study, of course, you said, but we'll go back to it again and see, will it still require some other elements so that we can say it's truly authentic? Thank you, Joe. So we can go to Annalyn Fatima Lopez. Si Annalyn ba, you're on? Okay ba tayo, Annalyn Fatima? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Can you share us about OSOE mo and why do you think it's authentic?
Oh, when we give orals to I work in a pediatric department po. So when we give orals to the residents, so well, it's authentic because we are questioning or examining the residents in real time, and then we also do the assessment or we evaluate it with the rubric. If they're able to answer all the objectives.
Okay. So you interview them, you record them, and you document them you score them using the rubric sort of thing, right? That's
yes,
the major element of that. So again, we'll go back to them because minsan we thought because we're already doing some sort of real encounter, but probably this is authentic. The idea is for us to later on understand that there may be something more or something that we need to add, some additional elements so that we can truly say that we are doing the authentic assessment. Okay, so I'll just go down na kung ano, tinan ko lang mga nauna. Jeneline, so
Hi po, good afternoon to all po.
Can you introduce yan? Hindi ko tanong pala yung iba kanina. Can you introduce ano yung affiliation and your practice?
I'm Miss Jeneline Carrasco Arjete po from the University of Perpetual Health System, Laguna.
Okay.
So what I wanted to share po regarding the authentic assessment, it is especially po nowadays, since we're online class, it's quite challenging for us po to come up with something that students will do. So, medyo, yun nga po, sabi ko nga po, medyo challenging. But for me po, authentic assessment, just like what others said, they've mentioned about performance, they've mentioned about the rubrics, and most of the authentic assessment, unlike traditional one, authentic assessment is more focused on the real world situations. And again po, as what I've written there sa chat po, more on, medyo so ang sabi ko po doon ay for
involving all
timely, yeah, medyo makakalimutin po agad, sorry. But for me po, after the courses I've taken sa other programs po na nakuha ko before, they were saying that authentic assessment now really drives curriculum. And it's instead of focusing on selected response, more on constructed response na po ang meron sa authentic assessment. That I think that what makes it challenging po.
Okay. So
yun lang po, sir.
You're
Thank
talking
you po.
about it influencing the curriculum and that it is based on the idea of being able to construct something.
Yes po. Yes po, sir.
Okay.
Thank you po.
Okay, thank you. And of course, ating si Melanie nandito. Oh, Melanie. On ka ba, Melanie?
Afternoon.
Yes.
Sir, for example, when we teach motivational interviewing in the postgraduate po, we found that there's no other way but to first ask for the patient's consent that the interaction will be recorded. Para when we assess the skills for motivational interviewing, talagang with the real patient and using rubric also, scoring system, and then we give the feedback to the trainee po afterwards. But sir, it involves a lot of takes before they can fulfill the the required.
A lot of take. What do you mean?
For example, sir, it will take about 4 layers of yung from sir, knowing to sir hanggang sa showing hanggang hopefully workplace based pa nga later, sir. So nothing beats talaga, sir, yung talagang i-record po yung real encounter with the patient kasi the student can be an authentic self niya. Nakikita ka agad dun, sir, kung nagpapakitang tao ba siya to fulfill the rubric or talagang siya yon, yung personality niya, yung interaction niya with the patient.
Interesting point yan, Mel, no? Kasi mamaya pag-uusapan natin, may konti akong isang slide lang related basically to that issue of recording.
Yes, sir.
Especially now in the context of, di ba ngayon, yung mga exam natin, may video, sort of thing. Lahat na lang ata may video kahit saan ka pumunta, no?
Yes, sir.
But will that and there's actually another future in the video, no? Halimbawa, na pag-uusapan natin mamaya na 'di ba sa mga intelligence, pag nanonood ka ng mga series sa TV about intelligence na nagtatrack na ng tao, their movements, and sometimes even their reactions are being documented. And at that particular point, ang gumagawa na ng interpretation yung mismong artificial intelligence. And will that have any impact later on? Kasi mukhang papunta na tayo ron papunta na tayo to the point na baka hindi na nga tayo tumingin Hayaan na lang natin yung AI na mag-interpret ng lahat ng nangyayari sa video na napapanood niya. And so it's an important concern, and you're looking into your dimension kanina of the relation, the parang group what you call it, the group formation, right? Parang ganun in relation to, sige, titingnan natin. So, pero magandang point yun. So we have kanina, we talk about curriculum involvement, all the domains, but it's also now looking into the technology being available to us. Ang paggamit ba natin ng technology ay sapat na para sabihin authentic yung ating assessment? Kung may epekto rin yung pagbibideo sa kanya, sabi mo kanina, Mel, kasi kinukunan ka I think some of you would have remembered sa class natin, yung sasabi nilang Hawthorne effect, di ba? Na-video, and will that have a effect? Eh kung nabibideo ka, alam mong binibideo ka, at ikaw ay gumagalaw dahil alam mong binibideo ka, will that now be your true self? Will that be the authentic you? So there's another thing being raised, no? So mga dalawa na lang siguro tayo, no? Okay pa ba? May time pa naman tayo, no? Okay, hanggang alas 4:30 naman tayo. Eh. Si Jennifer Galia. Tapos mamaya si Mean ang last natin before we proceed. O magra-random ako mamaya sa dulo. Si Jennifer, you there? Para tayo nasa no, sa phone-in. Jennifer, are you there? Diyan ka pa ba, Jennifer, o nalaglag ka na? Wala si Jennifer. 2, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, mamaya na lang ikaw, Jennifer. Ha? O, Mean, you're...
Yes, sir.
Oo.
Yes, sir. Sir, ang nilagay ko po is yung performance ng actual task. So, what I was thinking of is, let's say, I also handle medical students, yung mga clerks po. So, one of the things that we are expecting of them also is that they should be able to, let's say, demonstrate yung mga common pediatric procedures. Kunwari, maglagay ng IV or immunization, mga ganun po. So, those are some of the things that I think an authentic assessment would be actual observation and looking at them performing their tasks po. But I completely agree with what Mel mentioned earlier. Totoo naman yun na, yun nga, no, na parang medyo may ano pa rin yun. Hindi pa rin siya maybe completely 100% authentic kasi hindi ka rin naman sure kung ginagawa niya yun dahil alam niya na pinapanood mo siya or it's being graded. So for example, pwedeng at the time that you're grading the student, extra bait siya dun sa patient or extra nice siya dun sa nanay. Pero sa totoong buhay, pagka hindi ka na nakatingin, baka iba yung ginagawa niya. Or baka let's say, something as basic as you want to see if they're performing an aseptic technique. Pero yun pala, pag di mo gine-grade, di naman pala siya nag-alcohol. Kaya basta ginagawa na lang niya. So, yun po.
Okay, thank you. So, ibig sabihin natin lahat, parang sasabi natin dun sa'yo, Mean, ay, will performance be enough? Or will there be some other elements during the performance? Or some other issues during the performance that will make it authentic? Diba? Dahil lang pinakita sa'yo na kaya niya, yun na ba yun? So that will be an issue that we will try to discuss as we move forward. Tatalon-talon na muna ako ha, para lang makabigyan natin yung iba. Si Romnick. Romnick Padilla. Ayan. Diba
Sir,
Romnick.
sorry, nakamute pala ako.
Baka artistahin na. Romnick Padilla pa.
Thank you, sir. For me, authentic assessment po should be meaningful po dun sa mga participants po. Like magagamit po dapat nila yung mga natututunan nila dun sa activities in real life po.
Okay.
Yun po yung para sa akin.
Thank you, Roman. So far now we have, since we started with the sharing, nakikita natin na there are several already elements of authenticity, no? In terms of authentic assessment pala. You talk about it being in the context of your outcome, as you shared, that it be in the context of being performance-based, and that it could be recorded, but it will have to be recorded and will have to be scored according to a certain standard, which you usually see in a rubric. But you say it may not be enough because what good is an assessment if it is not relevant to the participant? Di ba? Parang ganun. Sabihin mo lang na meron ka kasing kakayahang mag-assess ng ganon, kaya in-assess mo rin, di ba? But how relevant is that? So these are the things that more or less would say influence our own understanding of what assessment is. Hanap lang ako ng iba pang puro kasi kakilala. Sana hanap ako ng hindi ko masyadong na kakasalubong pa. Yan. Sino bang magre-raise na lang ng hand, hanapin natin. Ayan. Sino ba hindi pa nakita natin? Si Ralph ba? Ralph Julius Mendoza. Yan.
Hello, sir.
Oh.
Maganda po ng hapon po sa lahat. But sir, I think gusto ko lang dagdag yung dimension ng responsiveness dun sa authentic assessment. For example, when we teach skills to say residents or medical students, di ba, we are very much concerned about the quality, ano yung minimum standard required for them to pass. Pero I think magandang i-add yung layer ng dimension na ano ba yung expectations, for example, ng patients. Kaya sa mga exercises or sa mga evaluation din po, parang nandun yung pagiging patient-centered, for example. Parang we always incorporate that element na ano ba yung ine-expect ng magiging clients or end users or patients when you have this particular skill or particular knowledge. So, yun po yung gusto kong i-contribute sa ano.
Romnick, ika-clarify ko lang yan. Ano yung sasabi mong about patient? Relevant, where will you consider that? At what point?
Bali, Doc, di ba po, for example, I was po kasi a chief resident before. So, pag nagdi-discuss po kami ng, halimbawa, mga cases ng patients, so, di ba, pag-uusapan po namin yung basics from history, objective assessment, objective findings, assessment plan, etc. But in the end po, we always ask, ano ba yung more important dun sa patient? So, kumbaga parang, yes, we are measuring ano yung knowledge and skills ng resident, but also we try to fold into the exercise yung outcome in the end. Kumbaga parang downstream po, paano po ba magta-translate yung skill na gusto nating ituro doon sa kung paano mamimit yung needs and expectations ng ating intended users in the end po, or benefactors ng ating mga pinag-aaralan.
And that's the point I'm trying to clarify. You're talking about patient issues. When do you consider it? When will you consider it? When?
Dapat po, Doc, I think central po siya in the discussion. Like we parang when we evaluate residents, we always fold into the parang feedback na eto na mismo, for example, because in actual practice, this is more important to the patients. Parang ganyan po.
Oo nga.
So,
I agree with you on that. Pero inaano ko sa iyo ay, we know that. Pero saan mo ilalagay siya? Kailan mo siya gagamitin?
Okay po.
Is it only in the processing? Or is it
dapat po naka-fold siya dun sa rubrics, Doc. Kumbaga parang dun sa pag-develop pa lang halimbawa nung ID or nung parang rubrics for evaluation, naka-fold na doon yung element ng responsiveness doon sa end users or doon sa patients, for example, kung pinag-uusapan po mga residents, ganyan. Hindi lang po siya naka-center doon sa ini-evaluate kung ano yung dapat na alam niya, but also ano yung expectation sa kanya, parang ganun po, based on actual encounters.
Kasi parang sinasabi mo, in real life, you will have to consider patients' needs and patients' reaction or whatever, no? And if that is the reality in the future, then that future will have to be present now, right? And that future will have to be present in the scenario, not necessarily just post. Ibig sabihin, na nahanap natin, ang tama ka, lalagay natin yun because from the very beginning, it will have to be part of your planning preparation. Okay, sige. Thank you for all those who shared. Sorry, hindi ko kayo matatawag lahat. Mamaya, we'll call more people as we go to the next exercise. Okay. Now let's go now to the definition. Now that we have gathered some already information related to authentic assessment as experienced, as contextualized in your own practice, let me just provide you with just some additional information. So, sabi nga natin kanina, when we talk about authentic assessment, we refer to an alignment. Kaya nagsimula tayo sa issue ng what is the most important term that you need to address, or the most important issue that you need to address when you are preparing for whatever assessment, actually, not just the authentic assessment. And that will be alignment. And that will be alignment between assessment tools and skills manifest. As sinasabi kanina ninyo na meron kayong OSPE, meron kayong CMELs, talk about videos, si Romney talk about, for example, sariling rubric. Most of you talk about rubrics. But we also want to make sure that the rubrics or the assessment tools, because the rubric is your recording instrument, and all the other tools that you will use would be able to properly record and be aligned with the criterion or the criteria you will be using for the assessment. So therefore, you have to make sure that your assessment is aligned with the same skill that are needed in real-world settings. Real-world settings. Sabi nga natin kanina, not because you can discuss something in a simulated patient scenario, ay masasabi na natin, if you are faced with real patient, the same amount, the same you will be able to do it. Diba? Kasi there will now be other factors in the real world. Kaya nga I'm trying to really get this out of Romnick in terms of what do you mean by patient feelings or patient reaction? Will you consider that? Sabi natin, will that be doon sa dulo or kailangan lahat ng yan? Sabi nga niya, nalagay naman na namin sa rubric yan na pati yung reaction of patients. But of course, we're not after the reaction of patients, but we're after the reaction of your residents to patients. We can actually ask the patient to simulate all kinds of reactions, but it will be the ability or the demonstration of your residents' ability to respond to these different scenarios, not only responding, but responding according to the guideline or to the criteria that you want them to embrace. Ay makikita natin, okay? Another definition is rather than select answers. Kasi meron din tayo namang assessment na nagki-case scenario din tayo. Halimbawa, yung pwede tayong magkaroon ng multiple choice with the case scenario cascading, but they will be selecting answers. Pero sinasabi nga, it will not just be about selecting answers. Students should be able to actually perform a task. Well, if you think that selecting an answer is a task by itself, it's okay. But of course, selecting an answer is not as easy. Meaning making an actual decision of what to do is not as easy as just selecting a paper option, right? The option in your multiple choice. Or asking them to write probably their clinical approach to the case will be different from just selecting series of questions that will, if you add up together, will provide you with a picture of their understanding of the procedures and how they will be used in the case scenario. But that may not be enough. So you have to go beyond just asking them to select answers. Kaya nga minsan yung ating minsang mga rounds where you try to, bombard students with questions or giving them some particular options as they make their choices may sometimes be not enough, because in real situation there will be no people, there will be no consultant that they can ask or that can provide them with prompting when they are managing their patients. And you need to realize, kaya nga tinatanong nila si Mel at tinatanong ko yung nauna pa, I can't remember na, will that that be enough, or it's basically because they were able to perform a task? But remember that a task, an authentic activity, is always faced or will always face in performing authentic activity in real life situation. You will always be faced with complex challenges. Ibig sabihin, kung ikaw ay nurse, hindi naman lahat ng araw na nandun ka sa ward, pare-parehong kausap mo. Minsan, ibang scenario na meron. Minsan naman, iba yung case na meron. Yung iba naman, ibang klase ng managerial, what you call it, managerial approach sa ginagamit yung iyong head nurse. Di ba? O sa araw na yon, kulang ang iyong supply. Nung nakaraang araw, lahat ng kailangan mo, kinukuha mo lang. Suddenly, you are faced with this situation where you have a surge capacity and you seem not to be able to get the requirement for that surge capacity. Nabubwisit ka na. Ibang-iba yun doon sa ibang ospital kasi palagi namang meron. Hindi mo wino-worry masyado. Paano kung napunta ka ngayon sa isang scenario? Yung kailangan mo hindi palagi ganun kadaling makita. These are complex challenges. And these complex challenges, scenarios, may impact on the way they behave. Kaya sasabi kanina ni Mel na i-video mo. But in that kind of, let's say, for example, a situation where we can actually isolate some other variables, para sinasabi natin, clean yung scenario. Malinis. Sa totoo, hindi naman ganun kalinis lahat. And of course, centers on active learners that produces refined results or products. So therefore, you have to make also a decision later on. Are you after a product? Or are you after a procedure? Palagi bang may product? Palagi bang procedure? And of course, kailangan natin ng multiple learning indicators. Is your rubric enough? Is your rubric able to provide you with a good picture, or that your rubric will be able to at least collect information from multiple learning indicators? Di ba? Parang nagbibigay tayo ng written exam, isang indicator lang siya. Lalo kung yung exam mo ay memorization, yung exam mo ay true, hindi ka nakakakita ng ibang dimension. And the same thing with authentic assessment. You have to make sure that there are multiple indicators of that performance. Kaya minsan yung mga estudyante natin, even fellows, even residents, sometimes would complain before, nung unang panahon na medyo hindi pa sophisticated yung ating assessment. Ang hirap naman yung napuntahan kong consultant. O yung consultant naging learning and product indicator. Ay, napunta sa aking case, madali. Ang napunta sa'yo, ang hirap. Kahit siguro ako, hindi ko masasagot yan. Di ba? Yung mga ganong situation, well, authentic in a way because you're using case, but the results may not have addressed all the other learning indicators. Kaya hindi sasabihin mo, ito naman siya, ito yung buong pagkatao niya. Parang sinasabi mo nga, kaya ito maganda yung sabihin dito eh. Parang tinimbang ka, ngunit kulang. Yan. Minsan you feel that you were measured, but there are other elements or other characteristics or dimensions of you that were not basically documented because of the inadequacy or the inability of the tool to record such. No? Wala dun sa indicator. Kaya nga sinasabi ay, ano ba yung sinasabi? Hindi ko alam kung si Einstein yun. Sorry. Nag-senior moment ako. Babalikan ko mamaya. Tuloy na ako sa next. So, therefore, simply acquiring knowledge through memorization and lecture is not sufficient to demonstrate essential skill necessary to be successful in the particular field of profession. So, therefore, kaya sinasabi natin ganyan, inaano natin what is authentic assessment, sinasabi niyo na kailangan kasi real siya. Kasi kailangan siya related to the future profession, future of the profession that they will be they will be working with. Because just by simply acquiring knowledge and through memorization and lecture is not sufficient to demonstrate essential skills. Kaya minsan, nalalagay sa tanong, scrutiny yung ating mga board examinations. Is well, the board examination might contain scenario, but will that be authentic enough? Or will that contain enough of that real feel to the point that when they pass the board examination, we can say that we did perform an authentic assessment? Na indeed yung mga written examination na yan is enough to tell us that performance that they can do, or can they actually perform that procedure with safety of patient in mind. So it's important. And we are doing authentic assessment so that we can provide our students with real-world experiences that will have direct bearing on their careers and those preparing them for challenges ahead. So nakikita nyo dito sa dalawang to na authentic assessment by itself is not just an assessment. Technically, authentic assessment is also a very powerful teaching tool. Para mo na rin siyang nilagay sa isang sitwasyon na haharap niya sa future, pero ginawa mo ngayon. So therefore, the feedback that you will provide, sabi nga kanina, Roderick, the patient feeling, o meron kang pasyente na nandoon at yung reaction ng pasyente ay binigay sa'yo. Halimbawa, humihingi ka ng patient feedback at kung honest at magaling yung iyong patient, be real patient or patient simulator, then you will be able to get a real feedback. Yung talagang pag sinabing hindi ko na po nagustuhan yung ginawa nyo, talagang sasabihin niya. Kasi yun ang totoong buhay na sasabihin ng pasyente sa kanya. And if we can create that kind of scenario, and that feedback will be made available to students, and the student will look into that feedback, then you already address one very important knowledge dimension, and that is metacognition. Because you will not know that you will not know that you're doing it wrong if you don't get any feedback. Kahit nga may video mail Kahit may video. Pero kung yung pagtitingin mo sa video, hindi mo alam kung ano hahanapin mo ron, yun mismo nanonood na estudyante na binigyan mo, sige, tingnan mo nga yung ginawa mo, hanapin mo yung mali mo. Nakakadalawang araw na siyang kapapanood ng video, sasabihin pa rin niya sa'yo, sir, ma'am, wala akong makitang mali. See? Therefore, kulang ang kanyang appreciation of the elements of that performance, and therefore that particular simulated experience, simulating real-world event, is not providing that kind of information or that teaching learning opportunity to be used by students. Dito ko palagi naaalala yung sinasabi ng teacher ko sa master. The difference between practice and practice. Practice ICE and practice ISE. Hindi ko alam kung British lang yun or English difference. But the one major thing that they are saying is that practice will only really be real practice when feedback is made available. Kaya sa totoo lang, mga ka-HPN teachers, even if you bring your students to real-world experience, but when there will be no opportunity for them to receive any feedback from that experience, that world experience will be of no bearing, especially if it will not be processed. Baka akala ng ginagawa niya, yun dapat ang ginagawa sa real world. And also, authentic assessment is consistent with Vygotsky's dynamic assessment in that when we talk of Vygotsky's social learning theory, our social interaction simulates the learning process. Ibig sabihin, kung kayo ay nag-uusap, kayo ay may real patient yan at merong real facilitator interacting with the student during the examination process, nagkakaroon ng socialization process, and that socialization process will lead to a meaningful learning experience. Pero hindi lang dyan. Ang ibig din sabihin nito, authentic assessment would require, kaya tinatanong ko kanina, mag-isa lang ba siya? Yung unang-unang senaryo na sinare sa atin, siya lang ba yon? Di ba, sino ba yung unang yon? Sinalo, siya lang ba yon? Why? Because one authentic scenario, one reality on the ground is that you don't deal with patients alone. You are part of the health system. So therefore, if you are testing a student without that system in the environment, part of the testing environment, then that will not be authentic enough. Di ba? Kasi sa totoong buhay, gusto na natin gawin nating mga estudyante ay nagpa-practice ng collaborative learning. If that is the future, then that future will have to be present in an authentic assessment. Dapat may kasama siya, may kausap siya, meron siyang nililink with, meron siyang kina-collaborate with. Because, as Bigotsi would say, it's part of the whole learning process. So kaya, tinatanong ko kanina, ano pa ba kaya ang kulang? Enough na ba na mayroon in-interview mo siya, tinobserve mo siya? Anong kulang? Na-address mo ba yung isa sa major program outcome ng nilalabas ng CHED sa atin? Yung interprofessional collaboration? And did you include that as part of the element of your test, of your assessment? Oh. So sinasabi nga, it was developed as a result of a criticism, by the way, on multiple choice tests. Because multiple choice test will not give you accountability. Ano yan? Pag pinasa mo ba yung multiple choice test, na-feel na kanya yung accountability niya? Baka hindi na. Baka yung ating assessment, sinasagot lang niya, tama naman yung selection niya, tama naman yung kanyang piniling sagot out of the 4 options or 5 options. Or from a case scenario, tama naman. Pero nafe-feel niya kaya yung accountability sa mga pili niya, sa pinili niyang option? Hindi natin malalaman. Wala namang mamamatay pag pinili niya yung isa. Wala namang nakatingin ng pinipili ko to eh. The most that will happen to me, bumagsak ako. Hindi ko masagot ng tama ito. But there will be no actual feeling of or simulation of accountability. It cannot be provided by our traditional examination. We just hope. Kahit na ethics may yan eh. Pwede kang maglagay ng ethics at pwede niyang tama ang sagot niya. Pero hindi ibig sabihin na yung sagot niya is enough for us to say, this person is accountable. Or this person has a high level of accountability. See? And of course also, clinical interactions are complex. At sinasabi ko nga ito kanina, yung complex for safety of patients. Kaya dapat it is essential that medical schools have evidence that their graduates have attained sufficient standards in core skills as indicated by the relevant accrediting institutions for graduating doctors have attained sufficient standard. Kaya mataas talagang panawagan to. When do we start preparing board examination with some authentic elements? Like the MLE's Part 3, Part 4 examination. Kahit paano, nakita natin yung stand. Because board examination by itself will not provide us with evidence the students have attained sufficient standards. Kaya nga ako, ito na lang palagi kong panawagan sa mga schools eh. Kayo na. Kayo na medical school, kayo na medical school, kayo na nursing school, kayo na PT school, or whatever health science school you are, or whatever course you are, providing or addressing, kayo na magkusa na magsiguro that your graduates have attained sufficient standards. Hindi na masyadong yung board examination. Of course, it's a big, what they call it, to me, sorry, this is my concern. Yes, it's a good advertisement. It's a good come on for your school. You have good performance in the board exam. High percentage of your graduates are performing in the board exam. But can you honestly tell me that your graduates have attained sufficient standard in relation to practice? Na yung sinasabi nga ni Professor Grajeda, pwede mo lang siyang i-trust, intrustable practice. Na alam mong yung pinakawalan mong doktor sa eskwelahan mo, yung nurse mo, yung PT mo, yung pinakawalan mo, pinag-graduate mo. Set aside the board examination for a moment. Just pinag-graduate mo. Ginagarantiya mo ba sa pamayanan na kung yan ay pumunta ron sa kanya? Kung yun ang graduate mo ay pumunta sa kanilang community at mag-provide ng direct health services, that you can guarantee that the people that they will be interacting with and who will be receiving services from them will be safe and will receive the quality of care according to the standard defined by the profession. Yan sa akin. Kung hindi kaya muna for the moment because of logistical issues ng PRC, then schools should at least make sure that their examinations at least is addressing the issue of authenticity. But just beyond that kind of making sure that patients will be safe, we also know that, or that you are addressing the standard, we also know that authentic assessment will have cognitive effect. Alam mo, bawat bagay na ginagawa sa classroom, bawat interaction na ginagawa ng iyong estudyante with another student, with patient, with their faculty, ay tumutulong sa sinasabi nating construction of knowledge. Because knowledge is constructed when people interact with the world and their surroundings. Tama, siguro hindi mo hirap na hirap ka sa family med, maintindihan yung health system. Maintindihan yung epidemiology, yung mga statistics, yung mga growth rate, yung mga mortality rate. But when you are with people on the ground and when you're dealing with COVID, and we're going all this data coming out of the news cycle, then you realize that that interaction is helping you strengthen, and not you just strengthen, to even, construct a more robust knowledge base. And also because, as it says here, students may learn to memorize in isolation, but the application of knowledge requires further synthesis at a higher level to be meaningful and relevant. So therefore, when they are being tested at that particular setting, at sabi nga kanina, it's about being relevant. Relevant ba ito sa pasyente? Sa estudyante? That relevance by itself, that meaningfulness by itself, will already add a positive, positive framework or the positivity in relation to structuring knowledge and thus making them realize the importance of really going beyond memorizing. And when students participate in authentic tasks, they become actively involved in their learning. Tingnan nyo, bakit mas excited yung mga estudyante minsan mag-take ng OSCE, mag-take ng practical exam? Because nafe-feel nila na mahalaga yung exam niyan. Pero yung exam mo na written, alam mo naman kung saan kukunin. Tapos di nila makita kung bakit sinasama mo yung ibang mga tanong. Hindi naman kasama, parang hindi mo maintindihan. Why are they including these topics, these issues, when in fact it will not even occur in 1,000 years, that this pattern is so extinct that probably it was during the dinosaur period that it first disappeared. The Jurassic period. And they still trying to give it and make it one of the more difficult exams during your microbiology class. Hindi na maintindihan, hindi na ma-appreciate. Kaya instead na mag-aral, aral lang para pumasa. Kaya sabi natin kanina, study to show. But not really study to perform. Because when your testing is authentic, when they know that it is very important for their future performance as a clinician, then that learning is seen by student now as a responsibility. Hindi niya na nakikita na ang may responsibilidad ng kanyang learning ay yung teacher. And it happened in remote learning, ngayong COVID. Hanap tayo ng hanap nasaan si teacher. Kasi remote learning nga. Kasi, sad to say, yung gagawin mo sa remote learning na asynchronous, pareho din naman ang gagawin mo sa synchronous. Magle-lecture ka rin. Kung ile-lecture mo rin lang at ile-lecture yun din naman sa asynchronous, antayin ko na lang yung lecture mo. Pero, for example, when students know that from what they will be doing something to produce something, which will be their major task during the asynchronous session, probably they will be able to see that relevance and make them more involved in the process. And we will discuss this in the ACTS motivational philosophies. And because they are part of the process, they become empowered. And students who are empowered are more motivated. And when you are empowered, there's a greater chance that you complete the activity. Relevant. Gustong-gusto mo, mahalaga, at ikaw ang gagawa. You are participant. Probably add more classmates and you go into that kind of Vygotsky social learning perspective. And then they become empowered learner. And when they become empowered learner, they know that they can do it. And that's a more valid indicator of attainment of knowledge, skills, and attitude. Additional benefit. Authentic assessment. Students learn to develop self-regulated skills. Students who use self-regulated skills perform better academically than unregulated students and are most likely to achieve higher academic goals. Ano yung self-regulated? Ginagawa niya. Nakikita niya mayroong mali sa ginawa niya. At nakikita may mali sa ginawa niya, i-modify niya yung ginawa niya. Nagkakaroon siya ng kahit walang faculty na magsabi sa kanya ng mali, nakikita niya yung mali. Ay mahirap yung matatapos na tayong lahat, hindi mo pa rin nakikita yung mali. Di ba? Kaya mahalagang kasama sa authentic assessment ang issue ng metacognition skills. Metacognitive dimension of knowledge, meaning your ability or the concept of knowing about knowing. You know what you know. You know what you don't know. And if you know that you don't know it, that you know that you don't know it, then you look for opportunities or even develop or identify or employ innovative strategies so that what you don't know, you will know. But first, you need to know that you don't know. Because if you don't know what you don't know, you will never know what you change. Di ba? And that's metacognitive. Sabi nga, learning is not about what you know. Learning is about knowing what you don't know. And that's metacognition. And that is an opportunity that is provided by our authentic assessment. And to add to that is this ARC's theory of motivation and authentic assessment. Sinasabi dito na, sabi natin kanina, authentic assessment, enhances motivation. And when students are motivated, they will attend more. They will be able to assign more cognitive resources. Sabi nga natin, attention. Attention is what? Attention is allocating cognitive resources. You need to attend to. Kung nagle-lecture si ma'am at gusto mo siyang maintindihan, you need to put your attention, meaning you need to have your cognitive resources allocated for that. Eh, paano kung ikaw ay may nagle-lecture? Tapos yung iyong meron ka pang ginagawang iba. Therefore, hinati mo yung cognitive resources mo. Then attention will not be enough, not even enough, to help you understand the concepts being presented. And if you are attending to, you probably would say, would be satisfied with what you're learning. And that satisfaction will make you confident. And the more confident you are, the more that you are motivated to learn in any direction nga, no? And of course, when the program is relevant, you give more attention. When you give more attention, then you learn more. And when you learn more, you feel more confident. And when you feel more confident, you feel more satisfied. And you attend more. And when you feel confident, you know that it's relevant for practice. Lalo kang namomotivate. So that's the ARC's theory of motivation. And the authentic assessment provides that kind of inspiration. Kaya tandaan natin mga ka-HPN, ang ating mga assessment ay nagmo-motivate, hindi dapat nagdi-demotivate. Ako, sinasabi ko yan palagi. Kung yung exam mo ay nagdi-discourage sa student, hindi yan magandang exam. Merong mahirap na exam, pero sasabihin ng estudyante, mahirap pero nakaka-encourage. Ay merong mahirap na hindi pa nakaka-encourage, di ba? So, always remember this. It's not our, to me, it's not appropriate. Sa akin nga, isang krimen na mag-i-exam ka lang, papahirapan mo lang kasi gusto mo lang magpahirap. Huwag mong gagamitin ang mahirap na exam pang motivate to study. It will never be effective. These elements here in the arts is what will make student motivated, not your threat that the exam will be difficult. On the contrary, it might even generate opposite reaction. Eh, mahirap naman pala eh. Mahirap naman palang ipasa yan. Di wag na. Ang tawag nila doon ay parang sa sociology na learned helplessness or yung sa expectancy theory na mababa ang expectations na pumasa, di wag na nating i-attempt. Unless really super motivated yung tao. Pero sabi na, yung teacher na yan, mababata. Kaya nga minsan nga, pati nga pag i-enroll sa class, minsan yung estudyante ayaw na mag-enroll, nadi-demotivate kasi mahirap na yung teacher na yan. Minsan, di mo maintindihan ng exam. Minsan yung exam man, di mo alam kung saan kinukuha. At minsan yung examination mo, hindi talaga nagbibigay ng grade na sa tingin mo ay tama para sa'yo. At see, These are reactions, and probably some of you have experienced that. And of course, that would bring us to another area here. When you talk about authenticity, you talk about understanding that there are two modes of knowledge. And in this particular perspective, for example, as modified from Gibbons, may dalawang knowledge mode, mode 1 knowledge and mode 2 knowledge. Yung mode 1 knowledge, ito, knowledge produced, tested by researcher, disciplinary. So ito yung sabi natin, kaalaman. Meron namang mode 2, knowledge created and tested by practitioners. It could be outside of the academy, knowing through action, blah, blah, blah there. And this one, sabi natin ay, if you are into the mode 1, that will be theoretical knowledge and therefore the assessment will be traditional, di ba? Eh, gusto mo lang manawa kung alam niya yon. Did they know about history of the Philippines? So whatever, anatomy of the human body. Yan, traditional knowledge. Traditional knowledge require traditional assessment. But there is also such thing as mode 2 knowledge, which called professional knowledge. Kung ikaw ay isang profesional, ano yung mga knowledge na kaya mong gampanan outside of the academy, outside of the school, kaya mong gawan? Di ba? Ito yung mga natutunan mo with your experience. So it will all be about applying knowledge to the professional context. And therefore, in that particular perspective, kailangan natin ay authentic assessment. Kaya nga, hindi naman sa lahat ng panahon kailangan natin. So, kasi natin, students cannot be solely lectured to and can then be expected to complete activities that require critical thinking and problem solving. Ibig sabihin yung kanina, traditional knowledge, pwede, no? Knowledge lang. But when you talk about mode 2 knowledge, then it cannot be lectured. Critical thinking cannot be lectured. Problem solving cannot be lectured. Problem solving will have to be experienced. And it will have to be experienced multiple times. It will have to be experienced to the point that you will be able to develop a good scaffolding of problem solving processes and algorithms. So ang sinasabi ay, our educational system, aside from testing, should provide interim steps that would develop them so that they will be able to succeed in the second order expectation task. Ngayon, ba't ko hinuli yan dito sa part na to? Because that would bring us to not just aligning our instruction with assessment, but because sinasabi nga natin na sa totoo lang, you cannot change your teaching without changing your assessment. Kasi kung paano ka nag-lecture, sigurado yun din ang lalabasan sa iyong test. Parang yung sinasabi natin palagi, you cannot amend your pedagogy unless your epistemology is changed. You cannot amend your method unless your philosophy is changed. And the same here. You cannot change your teaching without changing your assessment. Eh, alam mo namang i-assess siya ng remembering. Eh, anong pang teaching process doon? Alam nga namang mag-case scenario ka, tapos ang test mo lang pala, puro recall. So therefore, at particular that alignment will have to swing, no, in that particular or that direction of this influence will be bidirectional. In the same way, you cannot change your assessment without changing your teaching. Gusto mo sila ang iyong exam ay critical thinking. Pero never sa iyong teaching method na ina-address mo yung critical thinking. Gusto mo siya mag-solve ng problem, pero ayaw mo mag-problem-based. Tapos sasabihin mo sa kanya, bakit di ka marunong mag-solve ng problem? Because problem solving requires training. The procedure, the algorithm the concept map, di ba? Everything, the cognitive schema that you need to solve problem will have to be developed 2 times, to be enriched. Kaya nga sinasabi natin sa cognitive psychology, meron tinatawag na step, no, sa AC, sa Anderson's cognitive theory, na merong sinasabi natin na cognitive enhancement, cognitive enrichment. Every time that you see a problem, you solve a problem, a different problem, that is added to your schema, and that's enriching your schema. Kaya nga sinasabi, experts are not because they are better than you. No, they are expert because they have more schema available in their long-term memory that they can activate. Eh, kung pulmonologist ka, sa dami na nakita mong pulmo case, hinga pa lang, movement pa lamang ng chest. Di ba? Movement lamang ng iyong monitor ng respiratory, what you call it, apparatus. Meron ka nang naiisip. Nagda-diagnose ka na. Nag-iisip ka na ng intervention. Kung minsan mo lang nakita yon, anong isusolve mo? Ay, ang schema mo ay isang kaso lang. When you were dealing with COVID the first time, our schema about to manage with COVID is very limited. Kaya mataas ang ating mortality rate. Saka, add to that, wala pa tayong vaccine. Pero as we move forward, as we go along, nadidevelop yung ating mga schema of managing. Na-test natin to the point na pag mayroong pumasok na COVID case, kahit malala, meron ng mga intervention na available. And that will now be part of your algorithm. That will now be part of your schema of problem solving. And that is enriched by experience. So therefore, even your assessment should be able to provide that opportunity to enrich schema. Ay hindi makaka-enrich ang schema ang iyong paper and pencil test. Not be enough. Pero nga sabi natin, kung ganun mo pala siya susukatin, if you will to measure them this way in the future, then that future will have to be available now. Diba? Palagi kong joke nga na, gusto mo pala yung estudyante mo magaling magsalita. Ngayon, porcher, magreklamo ka, ano ka ba, porcher ka na, you cannot even communicate well. Galit ka. Di ka pa marunong magsalita. Bakit ganyan ang pagpipresent mo? When you go back to your own teaching method, sa 3 taon niya sa school, kailan mo ba siya hinayaan magsalita? Baka sa 3 taon niya, lahat ng ginawa niya ay makinig. Then you expect them to develop their communication skills. If that's how you want to assess them, you want to assess them on their communication skill, make sure that your methodology provides opportunity to develop communication skills. You want them to be critical thinkers, make sure that your methodology provides opportunity for developing critical thinking. Kaya nga sabi, alignment. Again, back to alignment. Teaching, influence, assessment. Diba? Common naman ang understanding yan. Common knowledge na yan. Even with students. Assessment, influence, students' learning strategy. Naku, huwag ka na mag-aral ng ganyan. Hindi ganyan magbigay si teacher. Memorization siya. Ayan si teacher na yan. Yung si teacher na yan, nagpapa-essay yan. Kaya ganun ka mag-aral. See? Our assessment influence even our students' learning strategies. Kaya dapat natin maintindihan. And of course, that would mean that our curriculum design will have to be also have to embrace some philosophy, some principles, so that it will be of congruence or aligned with our future authentic assessment. And that would mean our courses should also be authentic, real world, and relevant. Oh, nasaan? That our course will also be constructive, sequential, and interlinked. Oh, nandiyan ba yan? Nakikita ba natin sa curriculum mo na parang pinaghahanda mo siya for authentic assessment? May opportunity sila for constructivist activities? You require them to use and engage progressively high-order cognitive processes? Yun ang, di ba? Yun ang nakakalungkot. Ini-introduce natin yung problem-based. It's supposed to engage students to develop the higher order cognitive processes. Sabi ng iba, bumagsak sa board exam yung aming students, kaya balik na lang kami sa regular. Hindi naman kinikritik yung PRC. Inaano ko lang ay yung schools. Kasi nga naging mahalaga sa kanila, ipasa yung board exam more than ano lang yun it's my opinion, so you know, you may not agree with me in this, but the thing is, ganun ang aking frustration. We want our students to think critically, but our curriculum is not providing them that. Kung yung sabihin, anyway, sa clerkship, mag-iisip na yan. Sa third year, mag-iisip na yan. Hindi. Kinder nga, nag-iisip na eh. Kinder nga, nagsusolve na ng problem. Elementary nga, nagsusolve na ng problem. K-12, nagsusolve ng problem. Pagdating mo sa medicine, bakit pag ma-memorize mo yan? Just because first year siya, kailangan ma-memorize na lahat? Hindi. Pwede naman niyang ma-memorize habang nag-iisip eh. Di ba? The curriculum will have to be aligned. And of course, it will have to provide challenge, interest, and motivation to learn. And that we have covered for the last few, I think, hour or two. Naka 2 hours na pala ako. So just to have this, I think last slide before the next exercise. According to Maxwell, our course will be ideal if the allocation will be more or less equal. Parang spider web analysis na. Nakita natin. Merong authentic assessment, enough. May assignment, may collaborative activities, may lecture, and may traditional assessment. All of this will have to be present of almost equal allocation. Hindi naman pwedeng authentic assessment lahat. We still have to do traditional assessment. Hindi naman pwedeng lecture ka ng lecture at assignment na mag-isa siya. Kailangan meron din tayong enough opportunity for collaborative learning because the future is collaboration. And therefore, sabi nga natin, we cannot get out of the relationship between curriculum and assessment. So, our next exercise after all this, unless you have some questions at this point, then the exercise, pupunta kayo sa pwede nyo buksan. Can you list outcomes from your existing courses that you think are best assessed using authentic assessment? Outcomes ang pinag-uusapan natin. Tapos titingnan natin yung outcomes nyo para makita natin. Any sabi ni Tani, is the use of traditional assessment tools, like habang inaantay natin yung mga mag-fill up kayo doon sa mag-submit kayo ng mag-submit kayo ng Google Drive na answer sa Google Drive. Magsagot-sagot muna tayo ng mga ilang tanong dito. Sabi ni Nathaniel Yang, is the use of traditional Tani, pwede ka bang ikaw magtanong yan para makita naman kita at paki-introduce yung sarili mo so that we can see our environment na ang dami natin, and we are all surviving in this crisis, and I think it's important to get a glimpse of each other para makita naman natin. Tani, nandiyan ka pa ba?
So yes, I am. Unfortunately, I'm not prepared to show myself.
Okay.
However, the question kasi is that, and I've been actually reading the reference that you provided. I was able to get it, and they said that, well, there is a time and place for each kind of assessment.
Yes.
No, and then because knowledge, I guess we'll say that one thing is that some knowledge is like baseline knowledge, or stock knowledge, stuff that we expect everybody to know. But it's supposed to be ingrained already because these are things which we should be able to see in general, and have a good working knowledge of, kumbaga. We will always be in a situation, however, where we will deal with things which we do not know. It's beyond our knowledge base. And that's, I think, where the authentic assessment will probably come in, where you will be faced with a real life situation na your knowledge base is incomplete. But you have the baseline capability to acquire more knowledge, to address that particular situation. Yeah. So that's why I think that perhaps my answer to that, to my own question actually, is I think that they should coexist. That we should be able to still use traditional assessment, perhaps in the lower years where we are trying to establish a good baseline knowledge. And then in the upper years, use authentic assessment now, where you're actually applying it. Or maybe not just in the upper years, you can actually start doing it in the lower years also. Ako personally, I tried to do that. But the problem nga lang is how to grade it. Yan, diba? I can provide a real world situation, but when you say assessment, does it mean it has to be graded? Diba? Or will just the mere doing or performing of something be the end all already at that stage? Maybe not in the upper years, but in the lower years. Kumbaga, you're trying to say, okay, does that person actually show higher level thinking skills already? You just have to say that you can infer that that is the case, but you can't really grade it.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, sir.
Kung sabihin natin, minsan, the authenticity may be dependent on the outcome na required. Diba? It may be authentic, at katulad sabi mo, kung ito yung knowledge exam sa first year, and if that's the outcome that will have to be authentic during the period, then that exam will be authentic for that particular period, di ba? Kasi yun naman ang outcome na gusto mong i-measure. Pero, kahit paper and pencil yon, it will have to go beyond the remember dimension. Kasi kahit naman first year yon, they will need to make these decisions already. So by itself, yung critical thinking decision making lang is authentic na eh. Not necessarily, kasi ang akala natin sa exam natin palagi is we'll have to make a clinical decision. But not all decisions are clinical. Diba? Some other decisions will have to be, just basically a process where we want to make them to make decision per se. So kaya nga yung authenticity issue natin ganun ang pinapakita, pwede nagsiswing yung authenticity mo. Hindi naman pwedeng nagsabihin kung halimbawa sa HPN, kung makakapagsulat siya ng objective na according to the guideline of a acceptable statement of outcome with all the elements, kung ano man ang school of thought na ginagamit mo, ABCD, SMART outcome or whatever, outcome-based, nakakapag-formulate ka, nagawa mo. At yun naman ang future outcome, magsulat ka ng outcome. And you're able to do that in a written format, that's authentic by itself as far as writing an intended learning outcome is concerned. Pero kung ang test mo ay which of the following is an example of an understanding verb? Which of the following is an example of the dimension of creating? So therefore, hindi yun authentic in the context of being able to write an acceptable statement of outcome. Or if you're into research, being able to write an acceptable and presentable proposal sa ating mga thesis students. Di ba? Yun ang authentic kasi tagal-tagal na nag-research. O ngayon, matatapos na, nakakadagdag na ng ilang years, additional years, hindi pa natatapos yung proposal. Yun ang authentic measure mo eh. It's not that you can define what is research or you can define what is HPL or what you can define what is a research objective or the difference between a research objective and a research problem or something like that. So, pwedeng yun ang test mo. Siguro pero ang authentic mo kasi ay maka-right sila. Yan ang terminal outcome mo eh. Di ba? So, yun lang siguro. Meron na bang, ikaw ba Claire mag-share nung sa ano? Paano ba yan sa drive?
Check ko lang, sir.
Si Coralie, gusto ko yung intriga mo Coralie, paki-ano nga itong intriga mo, yung exciting comment mo. Yeah. About schools. Are you there, Coralie? Can you share it? Can you talk?
Yeah, I'm here. What did I write? Kanina ko pa sinulat yun.
If all schools are able to do truly authentic assessments, kita mo ba yan?
Yan, okay. So I saw it na. So my comments here were just short, no? If all schools kasi are able to truly do authentic assessments, I think it will be okay to leave that as a function of the school because what you proposed, no? And but accreditation of the schools should be cognizant of the ability of the schools to conduct authentic assessments. Because if you grade it, they will do it. The institution will do it. However, anong nangyayari sa atin ngayon? There are only a few schools that are accredited. And so it becomes it becomes incumbent upon the PRC, the Professional Regulatory Commission, to conduct the authentic assessments. Because we don't know if these students who graduate from these not accredited schools are doing the authentic assessments. So if you do that, and it becomes a PRC requirement, then the schools will be forced to learn and conduct authentic assessments. Diba? Kagaya ng estudyante, pag tinest mo, mag-aaral sila kasi alam mo yun ang itetest mo. So it's the same principle.
So Coralie, pag sinabi natin hindi accredited, ano ba yun? Hindi accredited ng APMC o ano?
Yes, educational accreditation. And for us in the Philippines, it's really medical school accreditation is a function of PASCO.
So hindi pa, konti lang yung sa PASCO. Iba pa yung APMC, sabihin natin accreditation. Sa opening ng school yun, ano?
APMC, iba naman po. APMC though is the umbrella organization of all medical schools. And they can conduct sessions on authentic assessments. But the APMC is not going to be the one to deliver the assessment. About the schools have to learn how to do it and then do it.
So wala pa tayo nakikita sa drive. So can we go to Elmo? Meron kang comment dito, Elmo. Do you want to explain your comment?
Yes, sir. Magandang hapon po, sir.
Okay. Elmo. Kilala ka lang ulit, Elmo.
Nakapark po ako ngayon. Anyway, ang question lang po is for an authentic experience, especially now that we don't have patients that they can do their assessments on or do their clinical experience on. Simulations. Simulations lang po. Can simulations be enough to provide an authentic experience and assessment for our students?
Okay. Mamaya meron tayong isang slide for that, Elmo, no? Yung related do sa paggamit natin ng simulation, and will it provide a certain level of authenticity, no? Or we address the outcomes. Kasi nga ngayong panahon. Or pwede na rin. So titingnan natin mamaya yung mga ilang komento tungkol dyan as we move forward in the presentation. Okay. Pero may gusto mag-share dyan. I-ano lang natin kasi wala na tayong laman sa drive, so we can move on to some other groups. So may gustong mag-share ng, pwedeng sagutin si Elmo or magbigay ng kanilang comment.
Well, surrogate lang siya, Junette.
Surrogate.
I think it's surrogate.
What does that mean?
Simulation is a surrogate tool. So it does not truly reflect the whole simulation, the whole authentic experience. But of course, that's what we have to try to look for, diba? In these times where we can't even have a sufficient number of patients that our students can see. In fact, I kind of question the APMC when they say we shouldn't expose our students to COVID patients. I think they should be exposed because when else are they going to learn how to see the COVID patient, how to treat the COVID patient, for as long as we can ensure their safety.
Although ang just for to so minsan meron tayong nalilimutan na akala natin because we are in a situation where we can use real patient or we have real patients and interacting with our students will be enough, for example, to fulfill the requirement of authentic learning o authentic assessment. Wag ho tayo magpapakakalma na because you have a real patient encounter, the student is actually experiencing a real authentic situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, kailangan nating tingnan itong mabuti because palagi kong sinishare na minsan, we send our student to schools na maraming patient, like government hospitals. And they are alone there. Sometimes they don't have consultants or residents to provide feedback.
Mm-hmm.
They will end up with so many experiences or patient encounter, but not necessarily with enough feedback to change. Sabi ko kanina, yung knowing what you know and knowing if you don't know, right? Who will provide that? And authentic assessment should be able to provide that kind of opportunity. Ngayon, kahit ka gumagamit ng real patient, real scenario, kung walang ganung opportunity, kasi magiging major element mamaya yan as we discuss the critical elements of authentic assessment. Hindi lahat, kaya minsan, di ba, ang tagal-tagal mo, mag-aaral ka ng PowerPoint, mag-aaral ka ng tagal-tagal mo nang inaaral, wala kang nagtuturo sa'yo, sarili mo lang, hindi mo basta ma-solve kasi wala nagbibigay sa'yo ng feedback. Pero meron kang nakatabi, sinabihan ka lang ng 5 minutes, ito, mamaya, dami ko na natutunan sa'yo nang nagawa ko na to. So, yung mga ganun bagay. So, it's, I was dealing with activity, saan ko makausap yan na? In dealing with one suspect society, we're dealing with, for example, number of exposure to patients as a requirement for our residents or fellows. At sabi ko nga, minsan, tingnan nyo rin, baka hindi naman palaging ang requirement mo ay bilang ng patients. Baka ang kulang mo pa nga consultant na magpa-process with them. Maaaring ang konti lang ang pasyente, pero ang sisipag lang consultant to do one-on-one every day. You know, you have 5 encounters, but that 5 encounters is enough to provide that kind of processing and learning. Yung sabi ko nga kanina na metacognitive competency na missing sa marami. Nag-a-array si Arlene, bago tayo mag-proceed.
Good afternoon po. I'm Arlene. Yes,
please.
Yes. I am Arlene Grajeda Molina. I am lecturer in bioethics po sa Angeles University Foundation here in Angeles City School of Medicine. Your discussion about authentic assessment, sir, I would like to appreciate bago po tayo matawa, even before po matapos kayo, maraming salamat po. I think this is a lecture that you can do every year. So just so us lecturers and teachers are reviewed in our thoughts about assessment within ourselves. So going to that assessment of ourselves, have we thought that the assessor can be assessed? Should the assessor be assessed at one time? Like for example po, I think, for example, we do in medical school, we do item analysis after each periodic exam, each period exam.
Yes.
And I think it's a very good practice that we review the questions and the answers with the students, because clarifications are done that way. And even for the basic questions that require only knowledge or objective outcome, critical thinking is still applied through the clarifications. Because let's agree po na for core subjects like basic subjects, we can only have as much as knowledge versus the analysis or analytical questions or the application questions. Unless the method of teaching, which I think some medical schools have, is the modular type, for which they can go from basic to critical thinking, even for the younger medical students. So my question now to that is, how can we assess ourselves thinking of the rubrics of assessment? If we are doing the right assessment rubrics, and then maybe may I ask you to comment between the traditional teaching and the modular type of teaching in medical schools. Because my daughter now, who is preparing for the boards, came from a traditional school, but then her friends are in the modular type, and she appreciates at the same time the modular type during her review. So they both have good things in them. So maybe we can make something like a mixed traditional and modular. I don't know if there's such a thing, but that is just my comment and questions. Thank you po.
Okay, thank you, Arlene. So, una, you started with your analysis of the written exam, no? Yung item analysis. Of course, item analysis surely is only for written exam. And the information you will get is the more crucial information we will get will be item difficulty, discrimination index, and correlation, coefficient index. Meaning how well that exam function in relation to differentiating two groups of students. Kaya ito hindi masyado pa, ang gamit natin ng item analysis, Arlene, ay para makita kung effective yung item in discriminating between two groups. Kung yung dapat bumagsak, bumabagsak, at yung dapat pumapasa, pumapasa. O yung dapat nakakuha ng mataas, ay dapat nakuha niya to dapat yung sagot. Tapos yung hindi nakakakuha ng yung mababa ang sagot, mababa ang score, dapat lalong malaki ang chance na hindi niya masasagot yung item na yan. So, ibig sabihin, it will only tell you that information, but it will not tell you validity of that question. Na indeed, that question is measuring the dimension that you want at the level of authenticity. Kasi pwedeng maganda ang item analysis, but it's a recall question. Right? Kasi sinasabi lang naman niya, difficult, easy. Hindi niya sinasabing valid.
Sir, excuse me. I'm sorry. I think there's a misunderstanding. I understand that it's the exam analysis that you make us do, no, at the end of exam. I'm talking about item analysis, wherein we discuss the questions of the exam with the students after the
So you're talking of feedback.
Feedback, yes.
So
I'm sorry, because in high school they call it item analysis. So
you're talking to like analyzing the item.
Feedback,
visualization of the item. You visualize the item, you look at your answers, what do you think that answer. So it's basically a parang post-exam feedback mechanism where you try to see ang take ko dyan, Arlene, ay paano pinroses. Kasi pwedeng ang processing noon ay mali ka, tama ganun lang at hindi lumalim. And in that way, it may not go into critical thinking. Pwede kasing ang tanong ng faculty doon ay pwede pa ring lower order thinking skills. Depende sa tanong. Hindi magagaranti yun na aangat ka ng iyong, sorry to say, no, hindi just because you talk about it will not necessarily mean it goes above the higher order thinking skill process. Kaya kailangan ang requirement, ang doon ay mas tignan natin paano nag-i-exchange, paano nangyari yung transaction. Paano pinroseso, kung nagbilangan lang kayo ng sinong tama dito, sinong mali, anong sagot mo, ba't ka tama, ba't ka mali, ganun lang ang nangyari, pwedeng hindi mag-aangat yun, Arlene, unfortunately.
Opo. Pero sorry po, because in bioethics, there's a little of philosophy and all that, no? So there's theology, philosophy, ethics. Even the basic answers become subjects for critical thinking when we discuss them. So I think we are separate from the basic anatomy, biochemistry, when the answer can only be that.
Yeah.
Yes, opo. Thank you po. Opo.
Pero yung options mo kasi ron, ang option mo ba doon ay always correct answer or the best answers?
Best answers po usually.
Yung best
Because
answer.
we can, yes, we can give confusing some answers are maybe true but they are not the best. So we are, because of the limitation of the subject matter.
Okay.
It cannot be,
Tinatanong ko yun, because tinatanong ko yun kasi yung pagkakaiba ng best answer sa iyong
only
true and false version, I will not probably develop a critical discussion. Kasi true or false na lang yan. Thank you for it. So, hindi na siguro tayo makakapag-ano pa ng iba. So, I can finish my presentation na nag-i-enjoy pala ako dito. 3:45 na pala. Okay na, mag-proceed na ako sa next part. Although, share, pakita mo lang muna yung share dyan, Minika. Claire, yung isa lang bago tayo mag-proceed. I think I have time for that. Sabi ni Sigondina, madali daw ang mag-feedback sa face-to-face. Ayan. Technically, madali. Pero sa tingin ko, hindi naman imposible that we can achieve a very high-level feedback session in an online scenario. Like using tabletop exercises. Sa tingin ko, kaya naman natin. Sige. Activity list of outcomes. Tingnan natin. Number 2, perform a comprehensive pre-operative evaluation and determine patient's pre-operative risk, asking the right information the right way and understanding its meaning and its implications. So if you are to look at the verb used, perform, so it's a procedural. Okay. So you want to perform. So minsan titingnan natin, if you want to perform, do you want to record the performance or after just the performance, the correctness of procedure at not necessarily the quality of product. Mamaya pag-uusapan natin yon. Saan ka magko-concentrate? Sa proseso o sa produkto? Kasi hindi naman lahat ng panahon mababantayan mo yung kanyang pagpe-perform. But probably, kung meron kang MHP student, alangan namang bantayan mo siya sa paggawa ng kanyang thesis, siguruhin mong siya nga nagsusulat nun. That will probably be impossible. But you will right to do is to look at the product, yung kanyang sinabit na proposal, and the quality probably will be that. Sabihin natin. So that one is perform, asking the right information in the right way and understanding meaning and its implications. So asking the right questions, so it's a communication skill. So it's asking the right, so a performance. Understanding the meaning. So, hindi natin makita pa dyan kung ano yung magiging produkto ng asking the question pag nagawa na niya yan. Wala pa tayo sa pangatlo na yan. Clear, yung taas lang. Hindi pa tayo nandiyan sa level 3. Yan lang. Ibig sabihin, asking the right information, the right understanding its meaning and its implication to actual patient medical education ay procedural pa rin yan. Hindi natin kaalam kung gusto mong sukatin, if you want to measure the output, that this particular skill in asking question resulted to a quality history report of patient's history. Pwede kasi magaling magtanong, tama ang mga tanong, pero hindi mo nakikita yung tama ang fill up niya ng kanyang history, ng patient history, which is also an important element of that whole, the whole procedure. Kaya doon titingnan mo, ano yung susukatin mo. Saan mahalaga sa'yo? Tama ang tanong? Pero kung ang isang estudyante ay magaling na magtanong, baka ayaw na nating tanungin tingnan kung marunong siya magtanong. Ang hahanapin na lang natin ay kung napuproduce niya yung information na galing sa kanyang mga tanong. So mamaya titingnan natin. So when do you start looking at performance, more than product, or product more than performance. Okay, thank you. Sino to? May pangalan yan, salamatan natin. Sino yan, Claire? Naglagay ng pangalan? Yan, mga estudyante pala naman namin to eh. Baka isabit nyo yan sa inyong final paper. Si Nice pala yan. Ano Nice? Baka isubmit mo yan. May assignment ka ba sa finals? Baka sasubmit ni Nice yan ha. Yan. Okay. Tuloy tayo. Okay na tayo. Tuloy. Oops. Where am I? Ayan. Now we know about assessment, why we should be assessing, and why assessment should always be planned, implemented in congruence with your curriculum design. The same way, sabi nga natin, di ba palagi namang saying in any planning, workshop, it's always we always say, begin with the end in mind. Ayan, begin with the end in mind. Kaya nga naglilista tayo with outcome first. Begin with that end in mind. Why? Because the best exit point, the best entry point is the exit point. So ibig sabihin, knowing knowing where you're ending is crucial in planning everything in the design. Bakit yun ang assessment mo? Bakit yun ang method mo? So that will also influence your planning, your authentic assessment. So ano yung mga critical elements? So I will not be discussing here very focused type of tools, but only looking to these elements discussed by Ashford, Rowe, Harrington, and Brown. And the first one will be authentic assessment should be challenging. I will go to them one by one. The outcome of an authentic assessment should be in the form of a performance or product. I was mentioning this earlier. Authentic assessments should ensure transfer. Metacognition, we have also covered that. So kaya nga natin dinidiscuss kanina because we're trying to build up the required elements of the critical elements of authentic assessment. Importance of requirement to ensure accuracy of assessment. The role of the assessment environment and the tools. The importance of formally designing an opportunity to discuss and feedback. Kasi na si Arlene at saka sila ba? Pinipresent na itong issue ng feedback, and the value of collaboration, which we also covered. Pero ngayon, nilagay na lang natin siya as critical elements of authentic assessment. But let's go to them one by one, just for a little detail. So, authentic assessment should be challenging. And that degree of challenge is reflected by the authenticity of the real-world situation tasks. So, ibig sabihin, kung gusto mong challenging, ang ilalagay mo sa authentic talaga ay ito ang mararanasan mo sa iyong professional life. Are you ready for that? Para ka nanood ng training ng mga astronaut ng Apollo 11. Ano ba yung Apollo 13 ba yun? Napanood ka na. Si Tom Hanks, na bigla silang nagkaroon ng problema sa kanilang capsule sa space. And it was that the person who was left behind because of chickenpox na nag-solve ng kanilang real-world problem doon sa space. But, all of them actually simulated everything that would happen in space. That the world situation becomes a challenge and it becomes more exciting for you to deal. Kung astronaut ka, gusto mo makita lahat ng challenges na yan. And that hopefully will inspire you more as you train. Ganun din sa doktor, sa nurse, sa PT, sa OT, sa nutritionist, or anyone. Kaya ang pang-open mo palagi sa klase mo ay ito yung inyong future. Kaya nga sabi natin, the best way to challenge students is to talk about intrinsic motivation. And that intrinsic motivation is about the challenges that they will have to be ready for. Ginagawa mo to, inaaral mo to para handa ka sa future mo. And that would mean the challenge of constructing or producing meaning. Sabi kanina na Arlene, ethics kami. So we're not looking into this kind of multiple choice, blah, 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 but really looking into for them to be able to find meaning and probably construct some some ethical decision process or develop certain process so that they will be able to make ethical decisions after knowing all the principles. Also, construction instead of simply reproducing meaning and knowledge as created by others. Kaya minsan, kahit nga written exam, may case scenario, ma-realize natin, akala mo nagki-case scenario, yun pala after nagbigay ng definition, nagbigay ng case, patient, 12 years old, fever of 3 days, blah, 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 ito kanyang hemoglobin, hematocrit, blah, blah, blah. Pagdating sa dulo, ang tanong ay, which of the following is characteristic of dengue? May case, pero sa dulo, which of the following is characteristic of dengue? Ay hindi siya nag-construct ng meaning. Siya ay nagre-reproduce ng meaning that is already created. Kaya nga sabi ko kanina, kahit sa ibang mga guys, not just because you have a case there, not your exam is actually testing critical thinking. You have to be very careful. We've been through so many test construction workshops and so many we sit down in a lot of test construction or board examinations, and we realize that there are so many cases that are included na palamuti ng test but will not really contribute to the assessment of critical thinking. Next, sabi nga kanina, performance or product. And we can go back to the very basic difference between knowing and doing. Ayan. And if you go back to outcome-based definition, what outcomes are what learners can actually do with what they know and have learned. But that can be both product and performance process. Ang sinasabi ko lang ngayon ay ganito. If you think your student, for example, has been tested on performance, 3 taon mo na siyang tinitinan para magkuha ng blood pressure. Eh, wag mo na siyang i-test kung paano kumuha ng blood pressure. Ang i-test mo na sa kanya ay kung tama yung nakuha yung blood pressure. Kasi kung, chinek, tama, nag-introduce ng sarili, humingi ng permiso, nilagay yung cuff, tinest yung kanyang higpit, blah, 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 all the steps. Nakita mo, wow, check. Eh, alam mo na natin yan. Alam na niya yan. Minimorize na niya yan. Kung alam na niya, huwag na tayo mag-concentrate dyan. Mag-concentrate na tayo sa produkto. Kasi for example, dentistry, siyempre nung hindi pa siya marunong mag-perform ng oral procedures, bantayan natin, titingnan natin performance, blah, blah. Nung nakita na natin mukhang intrustable na yung kanyang competency sa oral procedure, di ang hihingin na, alam na lang kung marunong ka na yan. So, ang hihingin ko na lang sa'yo next ay yung produkto mo. Yung iyong pustisong product, quality of that, because I know how that you can do it. I know you. I've observed you. But for now, we're done with that. Doon tayo sa product. So, para na may mainstream mo yung iyong examinations. If you don't have enough resources, for example, to observe performance, so, mangyayari dito, yung mga observer mo, papasok lang sa performance. Yung mga product exam part, pwede namang yung pagkatapos na lang nila i-submit, saka lang mag-checklist, mag-rating scales ng kanilang product. So, it's not, So, mag-decide kayo kailan. Next, there should be consistency in the assessment and real-world application for which the learner is being prepared. Ito nga yung scenario niya, Dr. Todavario siya sa future Siya ay magpa-primary healthcare dapat yung real-world scenario mo na preparation sa kanya, primary healthcare. Hindi yung prepare mo siya sa isang tertiary hospital hoping to perform a procedure that will never be really performed in a community setting. Pero you're producing a doctor that will perform at a community setting at primary healthcare level, especially now in the UHC perspective. So kung yun ang future niya, yun ang preparedness mo, yun dapat. Parang naalala ko ng high school, may nakita ko doon sa province namin, nagtuturo ng typing, walang typewriter, kulang. Yung mga estudyante nag-drawing sa cardboard. ng mga keys ng typewriter. Siyempre, may typewriter pa nung araw. Siguro ibang estudyante ngayon, hindi na nakakita ng typewriter. But anyway, yung mga estudyante, dahil yung school walang typewriter, kakapiranggot siguro, yung dami nila nagsisekretarial nung araw. Uso pa yung mga secretarial courses, mga ganon-ganon. Nagtatype sila dun sa cardboard. Hindi ko alam paano nila assess kung tama. Binabantayan ba ng teacher kung tumatama yung daliri niya doon sa tamang tiklado ng cardboard? Wala yun yung feel, wala yun yung diin, wala yun yung pressure, the consistency. Kung gusto mo siyang isukat, kung marunong siya mag-type, kailangan niya ng typewriter. Hindi po pwede mag-type siya doon sa cardboard. Right? Authentic work performance na may often be drawn from a range of domains. So therefore, ito, titingnan mo ito in the context of combination of domains. Maaaring ito ay knowledge of facts, knowledge of content, knowledge of procedure, knowledge of metacognition, and all of that together will be applied in a single domain, which is create, in terms of the cognitive dimension. Kasi nga, wala naman dapat na isang procedure na solo. Kasi hindi naman niya mape-perform to na isa lang ang requirement. Knowledge lang of concept. You cannot perform a procedure with only knowledge of concept. You need to also know how that instrument will work. You also need to know the principle behind that instrument. And you combine that all together so that they can be able to perform a truly educated performance of a procedure. Hindi yung nangopya lang ng procedure sa Banawe, nanood-nood lang, mamaya nag-aayos na ng yung kotse. Pero wala siyang concept knowledge, wala siyang factual knowledge, wala siyang metacognitive knowledge. Assessments are designed to measure the learning outcome. The relevance of the work environment determines the assessment's authenticity. Yung sasabi natin kanina, sino ba nagtanong kanina si Doc, nakalimutan ko na yung name. Sinasabi ko kanina, at si ano rin, si Mark ba yun? Diba? Relevance of work environment determines the assessment authenticity. Ngayon, work from home, telemedicine. Ayun na yung realidad ng patient encounter. Patient encounter in telehealth. Ito na yung kanyang bagong environment. So therefore, the authenticity now is authentic na nakakapag-interview sa patient ng hindi face-to-face because that's the authenticity for telehealth. Hindi nga face-to-face kasi nga telehealth. Anong authentic nun? Ay di ba actual na telehealth? Alam nga naman to train telehealth, let's go face-to-face. Hindi naman natatama yun. Di ba? So nakikita natin, you have to adjust a little bit the authenticity issue depending on the requirement of the professions. So iba na. No? I think I discussed that in one time sa aming conference last year sa telehealth committee sa ating Congress telemedicine. Metacognition, ito medyo kinover na natin kanina, establishes the value of both critical reflection and self-evaluation. As I was saying kanina, it doesn't matter you will do a real patient, you do a simulated one. What is important is availability of reflection. Totoong pasyente nga, hindi naman nakaka-reflect. Totoong pasyente nga, wala namang metacognitive component. Kaya mahalaga yung self-evaluation because it can increase self-understanding and improve performance. Because in real life, kung ikaw, Joseph, Oliver, ay magtitrain ng iyong OB, in real life, pag nandun na sa community at wala na si Oliver na si Joseph na magbibigay ng feedback sa kanyang clerk at intern na nagpunta na sa doktor sa Dabayon Obstetric. Dapat, kailangan meron siyang metacognitive skills. Dapat meron siyang ability to monitor self. Kasi kung hindi, makakamatay siya. Hindi gumana ng una, inulit mo pa rin. Hindi gumagana yung iyong ginawang protocol, hindi gumagana yung iyong approach sa dealing with women who are not compliant to your instructions, or women who are not coming for prenatal examinations. Hindi gumagana yung mga pananakot mo sa kanila. Baka naman ibang dapat ang yung gamiting approach in dealing with them. But if you don't see that, parang mo sabi, ako? Ano nagawa ko? Ba't ako na naman may kasalanan? Kasi nga, hindi nga alam eh. Kaya akala mo tuloy, ikaw na lang palagi sinisisi. Pero hindi mo napansin na meron kang kukulangan din on your own, on your part, to identify this particular critical incident so that you can improve on your own. Kaya sabi kanina, balikan natin ulit yun. It's not about what you know. It's about knowing what you don't know. Because if you know that you don't know, that's the most powerful intrinsic motivator there is na in relation to education. Kaya ito kanina, tanong ko, performance product, balikan lang natin, importance of a requirement to ensure accuracy. So if you are performance or product, ang mahalaga dito yung instrument, yung tool na magdo-document ng performance of product. Kasi sabi natin, kung iyon ay performance, then probably you observe your record. Kasi nga, performance siya, kailangan i-observe mo siya. Pero kung product na siya, i-rate mo na lang yung product using a scoring rubric. I don't have to be present when you do it. Alam nga naman yung binili mong painting, binantayan mo yung pintor. Hindi naman, di ba? Binili mo yung painting na yun, nagbayad ka ng mahal, yung produktong yun, because alam mo, magaling yung gumawa niyan. Hindi ka na nakitulog sa kanila, parang, tingnan ko kung ginagawa, ikaw talaga gumagawa niyan. Hindi gano'n, di ba? So pag product na, rating na tayo. Pero kung ikaw, performance ang susukatin mo, you need to create. You need to develop observation, recording, and, rubric for rating, documenting. For number 6, the role of assessment, ayan, ito, environment tool. It talks about this one. Ito kanina, sino nga nagtanong, Coraline, ang ating tungkol dun sa simulation? Ito yung sinasabi dito.
Orian.
Ha?
Si Nathan Yang ang nagtanong.
If the assessment occurs within the context for which it is intended to be used, then such a context is sufficient, as it is usually either a replica of the approximate environment or a contextual anchor which reflects the convention of the environment. Ibig sabihin, even if it's a simulation, but if that simulation is sufficient enough to provide the correct context, then it may be appropriate according to the requirement of the context. Kaya nga nakalagay dito, sufficient as it is usually either a replica of the approximate environment. So depende nga kung ang simulation mo ay may fidelity pa rin yun May paper simulation to real patient simulation. So depende rin sa pangangailangan. But of course, some simulation will not have that kind of environment na may mga asungot, may nangungulit. Hindi naman lahat ng pagdidiluhod with patient ay cooperative ang nanay, o hindi naman pagdidilmubog sa ibang doktor ay courteous, or ibang doktor na nakakausap mo ay collaborative in their practice. Hindi lahat yun nangyayari. So therefore, kung yun ang totoong environment, basta maisaksak mo yun sa iyong simulation, then probably you will be able to get a feel, or you'll be able to provide a contextual anchor that would reflect that conventions for the environment. Kaya pwede din naman, sa ngayong panahon ng COVID, talagang maghahanap tayo ng mga pamamaraan. Okay na ngayon, ang mahalaga naman ay transferability of that skill. Katulad na nag-simulate ka, tapos halos na yung mga pasyente mo, wala kang pasyente, pero kaya mo silang i-simulate. Ang mahalaga doon ay gagaranti mo na na pag siya ay nakakita ng pasyente, yung ginawa niya sa simulation ay transferable. At ito yung kanina kay Arlene about feedback. At sinabi ko rin kanina kay Doc, whatever. This number 7 is a very important element of AA. Kahit AA siya, kahit siya authentic, kung mag-isa ka lang, ay wala. Kailangan may mechanism. And of course, the best contribution for that to happen, to discuss and provide feedback, is looking into that last element, which is the value of collaboration. Ay, bakit umulit yan? Ay, hindi pa pala ako tapos doon. Sabi mo, ganito ha. Ito pala, medyo may haba pala kung dagdag dong. Okay lang ba? May 30 minutes na pala. Ito, yung theoretical knowledge at saka professional knowledge will have to altogether be used to be able to perform or produce a product. Kaya ang iyong simulation opportunities will have to address both, no? At dito papasok yung dagdag ko lang itong cognitive dimension na to na paborito ko na yung binabasa ko to in the context of the taxonomy ni Anderson, the latest. Makikita natin dito kung paano na itong mga to, di ba, will be combined together to eventually perform this. And I will show that here. Yan. So, ibig sabihin, sinasabi natin kanina, the final dimension will have to be a combination of the other dimensions. Hindi po pwedeng mangyari na yung iyong final authentic assessment will only be representing one factual knowledge lang. Because the only way for that person to be able to do that, the last part here in the create perspective, tanggalin ko lang yung drawing ulit. Makikita natin na para magawa yung dulo na yun, which is the ultimate in the higher order thinking skill, the highest dimension in Bloom's taxonomy, which is create. To be able to do that, you need to combine all dimensions. Horizontal and vertical dimensions, meaning you combine both all your cognitive dimensions. I mean, you cannot create if you have not evaluated. You cannot evaluate if you don't know how to analyze. You cannot analyze if you cannot apply. You cannot apply what you don't understand, and you cannot understand what you don't remember. So, ganun ang direction niya. And altogether, what you remember, what a fact, you remember a concept, you remember a procedure, and of course, you have metacognitive, which is basically using the TAP, yung factual knowledge, conceptual, procedural knowledge. You use all of them to be able to assess your own performance. Kaya tingnan mo, pwede namang factual knowledge, memorize ng memorize. Minemorize nga yung step eh. Ang problema, minemorize lang yung step. Hindi na iintindihan yung mga elements of the steps. Kaya pagdating doon sa dulo, hindi niya rin alam ba't mali yung ginawa niya. Kanino ko pa ginagawa ito, mali na naman. Hindi ko ata makita ba't ako nagkakamali. Kasi hindi na proseso yung procedure. Kulang ang intindi ng procedure. That's important. Kaya ito, tingnan natin, the authenticity will again, as I just go back to it, no, yung low, high. Sabihin, if you go from remember to create, that will be the level of authentic. Kung ang objective mo lang naman sa inyong workshop ay sa iyong session ay talagang understanding lang, ay why create? Why develop an assessment that will require for a very authentic scenario? Hindi naman, di ba? Kaya nga sabi natin kanina, balance naman yung the five course elements that will have to be implemented together in terms of you have the authentic assessment. At the same time, you also balance it out with a traditional assessment. So, kaya kung titingnan natin, simple lang naman actually na pagdating natin sa combining the two dimensions ng yung critical dimension, clinical skills dimension ni Miller at saka yung cognitive dimension ni Bloom's as updated by Anderson. Nakikita natin na kung nakikita natin yun naman talaga lang yung pwede natin gamitin. Stimulus format, fact-oriented, response format. Talagang yun. Yung authentic na yun at that particular level. Meaning, we want to know if they know. And then they know. Yun lang naman ang gusto mong malaman. But when you go up, you want to know if they know how. Nakita na, hindi na po pwede. Sa description to sa description to sa differentiation ng levels, makikita natin na you cannot actually migrate from nose to nose how without changing your stimulus format to patient scenario. or simulation. Nakita natin. Kaya di ka pwedeng magmalaki na ikaw ay nagme-measure na ng above understanding kung ang iyong scenario pa rin ay factual-oriented at hindi ka gumamit ng pacing case. And the higher it goes to the level of authenticity, right? Stimulus format, hands-on na. And of course, habitual practice performance, level 4 ng Kirkpatrick's, but also in the same way that it is being presented here. Nakita natin. Siguro, itong sa baba, knows lang naman eh. Authentic siya as far as do. Can I say he knows? Yes. But can that knowledge, question, stimulus format, fact-oriented, be able to tell me if that person knows how and can do it? No way. No way. Kaya kung titingnan natin, magbabago pataas, magbabago yung iyong tanong, magbabago yung inyong instrumento, at magbabago yung environment mo in the performance of the competencies. Hindi ko na alam kung mag-interactive pa tayo, but meron kanina, no, isi-share na natin. No? Share your shared Google Drive, pero ito na yung outcomes and identify kung ano yung iyong authentic examination na gagamitin mo according. And if you're ready to, either you want to do performance or product. Now, balikan ko lang ito mamaya para matapos na tayo sa presentation. The major concern is still validity. And we all know that validity is theory to support the interpretation of test scores. And that is very dimensional. That is very, very related to the construct. Ibig sabihin, kung nag-multiple choice ka at nag-define ka, valid siya kung yun ang lang gusto mo. Kasi degree lang naman to support the interpretation eh. Kung ang interpretation mo ay they understand, okay na yan, yung test mo. Paano ang interpretation na gusto mo ay they can do? They can solve. There's no way that you can tell that you can interpret your result as they can solve when what you ask them to do is to give the formula. Hindi magmamatch yun. So, issue ng validity yan. So, dalawang bagay sa authentic assessment. Yung tinatawag natin na construct underrepresentation and construct irrelevant variance. Ano yung ibig sabihin niya? So, pag sinabi natin construct underrepresentation, halimbawa, meron kang mga assignments. Say, assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3, assignment 4. Tapos yung assignment na yon ay in-aggregate mo. Yung total niya, siguro yan na siya. Natapos ng lahat. Sa A1, sa A2, sa A3, A4. Ito na score. Will that score be enough to provide you with a valid interpretation of performance? Ang sabi ng ating source dito, Miller, the problem is ganito. Kasi kung di ba sabi natin kanina, kung itong mga item experience na ay kinongregate mo, tapos based on that nag-infer ka, may magiging problema ka sa inference. Remember, validity is the inference that you will give in relation to the result. Ang sinasabi dito ay, by just aggregating the scores, you assume that it is appropriate to treat this task as interchangeable. In-aggregate mo kasi, ibig sabihin, kung yung A2 would represent also skills in A1 or A3, A4. So, unfortunately, hindi pa mahirap i-prove na yung A1 is interchangeable with A2. Kaya paano kung meron kang manamiss? Mayroon kang in-underrepresent. So, nangyayari dito yung iyong inference will not be valid. Di ba? Kaya hindi po porke sa dating ng dulo sa finals ay pinagsama-sama mo yung kanyang mga projects, ay pwede mo lang sabihin, okay, magaling. Kailangan mo muna siguruhin na bawat isang yan nagko-contribute sa bawat isa din. This assumption, sabi nga niyan, notoriously difficult to justify within authentic assessment practices since variation between theoretically similar tasks constitute a substantial source of error variance. Ibig sabihin, mukhang marami kang pinagawa, but there may be theoretical variation, may be variation in terms of the task, and therefore that variation may affect the aggregated score, and therefore your inference may not be valid. So, may mga ilang ka pang kailangang ayusin, but we will not cover that. Si Professor Grajeda will have a more detailed input on rubrics, and this hopefully will be addressed. Kasi the rubric will try to see if all of these elements that are being aggregated are of similar elements and therefore can be interchangeable. And when we talk about construct irrelevant variance, minsan, test ka too broad. Nangyayari dito, efforts to construct a generalized inference about student learning resulting in devaluing the nuanced idiosyncratic experiences of particular student. Parang the difference between a global scaling at yung standardized scaling mo sa rating scales. Globalize mo ang rating. Ang problema mo dun sa globalized rating, baka ma-miss mo yung maliliit niyang ginawa na particular na kakaiba sa kanya and would be worth noting. But unfortunately, they are not, because you're using a more global scoring system. Halimbawa, nagano ka ng task specifically refers to student failing to perform consistently across a series of similar tasks. But the failure deal with specificity limits, because sa katitingin mo ng buong forest, nalimutan mo yung trees. Yan, nalimutan yung maliliit na competencies, and therefore, may threat sa validity ng iyong global rating. Akala mo, sa buong mukhang okay naman sa mahusay, pero meron ka pa palang ilang elements na hindi mo properly na-address, parang yung kanina, sa relationship natin doon sa issue ng aggregating the scores. Kasi nung na-aggregate na, hindi mo na nakita yung small forest, yung trees, at akala mo natuloy, okay siya. Kaya minsan, di ba sa OSCE, mahalaga, sinasabi ko noon, Coralie, ng mga una pa na nagbibigyan ng exam, huwag mag-develop ng masyadong malalaking cases, long cases, napakahaba, to the point na minsan nalilimutan yung maliliit na competencies. Mas mabuti pa, gumawa ng ilang maliliit na authentic scenarios with all the complete tricados for it to be authentic, so that you will be able to see and make sure that that particularly important category of performance or product are properly documented, measured, and graded, and that the final aggregated score that you are presenting truly represent the global rating or the global performance of the person. And this is what another nice last slide. Just a note about OSCE in the context of AA. Indeed, there has been evidence from some time that OSCE's multiple mini interviews and other forms of performance-based assessment can drive students toward maladaptive or stereotypical performance. Totoo naman. Mangyayari, alam niyang ganun siya i-grade. Ganun nangyayari. So, nagiging stereotype. Ganito dapat ang isang matinong doktor. Ganito dapat yung patient-friendly o ito dapat. So, nangyayari, inaano niya yun. Inaaral niya ng inaaral at nagiging na siya, parang dikahon na performance at hindi na nagiging authentic. And another one, in the context of now increasing possibility of artificial intelligence interpretation, where a surveillance camera, where a camera can actually will be asked to do the actual, halimbawa, hindi na tayo, tutulog na lang tayo, hayaan na lang natin si camera na mag-AI. Pwedeng yung technology na yon ay maka-affect ng person's behavior also. Ang tawag ni Michael Foucault dito ay panopticon, meaning individual's behavior towards a norm through constant, often anonymous observation. Dahil alam niyang mino-observe, nagkakaroon ng behavior na, well, tanongin niyo siguro, masama ba yun kung yung behavior na dinevelop niya eventually ay the good one? But that's not the authentic cue, di ba? Sabi natin kanina, it's not the authentic cue, especially in the context of, iba, parang sabi ko kanina, yung Hawthorne effect, eh. You behave because you are being observed at a particular point. Not necessarily because that is you. Kaya kung gusto mong ma-recruit sa opisina, pakitang gilas ka muna habang hindi ka pa permanent. Nag-permanent pa, bakit biglang nagbago na at a behavior? Iba na. Joke, may tinaman. And we end, again, going back to this, the self is multifaceted and capable of performing and producing different aspects of oneself depending on the situation or encounter. So therefore, we have to then worry about the difference between students performing for credit and being. Of course, we need the credit. Credit is good. But we want you to be the real doctor that you are supposed to be. Not doing it because you are graded, but you exactly know that exactly the characteristic of the doctor that we need. Doctor that will observe patient safety. Doctor that will observe everything. Sabi nga kanina na mga characteristics na naging bahagi na ng iyo. At ikaw ay nagsi-self-correct because you know that's the best way to do and because you have developed the metacognitive skills. So, I think that's all for this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doc Lam.
Meron atang, may time pa tayo. Sige.
Okay.
Tingnan lang natin yung ano kanina, may isang pinasa. Balikan lang natin siya, Claire, para to do justice to the assignment. Habang binubuksan ni Claire, meron pa kayong comments or anything you want to you know, kung ano man. Kung ano man itong mga masasabi nyo sa panahon ng pandemic na ito at kailangan nilang ibulalas. Arlene, tumataas ka ba ulit o kanina pa yan?
Hindi, kanina pa po yun.
Okay.
Salamat.
Sa baba, no? Yan. Sabi, kaya may tinating assignment ni Nice yan. Sabi niya, performance product. Enumerate a set of questions to be asked from patient during okay? Yun. So yung kanyang dimension. At that point, enumerate lang naman ang outcome na gusto niya. So therefore, the return demonstration. Pero yung return okay. The return demonstration of pre-operative evaluation, simulation of pre-operative. So nakikita natin, naintindihan mo, pakita mo nga. Sige. So nakita natin. So kung tutuusin, depende sa dimension, authentic naman yon. Yung authentic naman yung gagawin mong asking them to enumerate what questions they will ask. Kasi yun na naman ang gusto mo. Pero basically, sabi nga natin, at the end of the day, ayaw naman nating matigil dyan. Gusto talaga natin ay yung ma-achieve natin yung the most terminal of the outcomes, which is the outcome that we expect of you when you are already working in the workplace. So therefore, what you expect in the workplace will have to be brought to the teaching learning environment and also during the assessment. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon. Pero kung may tanong pa po kayo, open pa po tayo.
Thank you, Doc Lam, for the enlightening sessions. I'm sure that many of you have questions in mind. You may raise your virtual hand so that we can recognize you. Or you may type your questions at the chat box and we will read your questions. Si Ma'am Arlene Rosaline Molina.
Di na yan ata. Kanina pa yan.
Okay.
Kanina pa yan, Ricky.
Okay.
So, yung po sabi na, ayos sa'yo. Kinabisigan ang higa sa'yo.
Baka wala na nga. Ano?
Wala na.
May gusto ba magdagdag, mag-share? Yan. Mahaba na siguro. Nandiyan pa ba sila? Buti ba? 200 pa rin tayo ba? Yan.
Wala na po.
Sige.
Wala na po. Okay. Okay, Claire? We would like to award the Certificate of Appreciation to our speaker. National Teachers Training Center for the Health Professions, University of the Philippines, Manila, and Dr. Corazon Paulino Gonzalez Memorial Foundation Incorporation present this certificate of appreciation to Noel Pautagana for invaluable contribution as a speaker during the online monthly seminar on overview of authentic assessment given on January 31, 2022, signed by the president of Corazon Paulino Gonzalez Memorial Foundation Corporations, Dr. Erlin Sana, and our dean, Professor Melflor Atienza.
Thank you, Nem.
Hello, thank
you po.
Picture tayo?
Picture o picture, yeah.
Game done. Yeah.
Yes.
Mandy, pakuha ng ating picture. Wow, 225 pa din tayo, ah. Ito yung aming anniversary celebration. Yan. Okay, pasabi na lang, Mandy, kung tapos na, o nakangiti pa rin kami.
Third pray na tayo.
Okay. Yan, may nagtatanong, evaluation daw. May konting quiz doon na, napakadali lang naman. Kasi, sorry, but the council is asking for it. So, we'll be sharing with them yung discussion today and yung answers dun sa quiz. It's a very, very short. 3 questions lang actually for the quiz. And then, our evaluation.
Okay, we would like to remind everybody that continuing professional development units will be given for the various professions. Requirements will include registration to this seminar and joining us either through Zoom or YouTube live stream, and filling out of the self-assessment and client satisfaction survey. Please fill out the client satisfaction survey. It has a short and easy questions for you to answer. Claire shared this link through chat. This will also help us to improve our services.
Okay na, Mel.
Okay.
Okay. Our monthly seminar will be our 28. Please show us the entity seminar schedule. And okay, on March 28, the Health System Science Framework Assessment in Health Sessions Educations with our very own Professor Erlin Sana as a speaker. Okay. And then on May 30, constructing Rubik's. Then on July 28, on July 28, giving feedback. On September 26, assessment of clinical skills. On November 28, assessing the primary care health professions educator. So we hope to see you there. This ends our monthly seminar for January. See you in 2 months. Thank you. Domo arigatou gozaimasu. Gom sahaim. Sahamnida. Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody. Don't forget the client satisfaction survey po.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah.